Salutations from space, friends. This is Gemini Brett here with revelations regards to this great year of 2020. So we will speak about astrology, but mostly we'll be looking at 2020 through the lenses of astrotheology and sacred astronomy. How could I resist the stellar cliche of 2020 vision? Does this have to do with the two great gas giant planets, Jupiter and Saturn, coming together for conjunction? This happens about every 20 years, and this year of 2020, it's December 21st. What's incredibly powerfully, I guess, unique, at least for our time, is that this conjunction will happen in an air sign. The trip is that Jupiter and Saturn come together every 20 years. The ancients knew this as the Great Conjunction, and these conjunctions travel together in the same element of signs for about 200 years and then proceed to the next element. So we've been in about 200 years of Earth sign conjunctions, and we are moving into air sign conjunctions. Is this the dawning of the age of Aquarius? We're actually going to rap about that some today, and the idea of the turning of the ages, and see when and where that might happen. All right, so recent Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions: Taurus in 1941, Capricorn in 1961, Libra in 1981, when there were actually 3 Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions, and then Taurus in the year of 2000. So we actually have had one air sign conjunction already, December 31st, 1980, and then 2 dates in 1981, the last of them being July 23rd. And in a sense, that marked the beginning of 200 years of air sign conjunctions for Jupiter and Saturn. We, in a sense, regressed to the Earth for the 2000 conjunction in Taurus, or maybe that was the wrapping up of the last 200 years. We've been in this transition state. But from here forward, we will go full on into the air for the rest of our lifetimes. The Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions, 2020 in Aquarius, 2040 in Libra, 2060 in Gemini, 2080 in Aquarius. Some have suggested that it was a conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn that was the mythical Star of Bethlehem, something we'll get back to. But for now, let's talk about a pairing of another 2, and this is Jupiter and Pluto, who will have 3 conjunctions in the year of 2020, also in the sign of Capricorn, April 4th, June 29th, and November 12th. Recent Jupiter-Pluto conjunctions: 1968 in Virgo, 81 in Libra, Scorpio in 1994, and Sagittarius in 2007, this year in Capricorn. So you can see they progress through the zodiacal order, these Jupiter-Pluto conjunctions. And again, we see 1981. And in fact, like this year of 2020, Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto were all traveling together in 1981. It wasn't as tight as this year of 2020, where we have this Capricorn Council of Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto, many other planets kind of coming in to join that at different times. But in 1981, very close, in a sense, triple conjunction, or at least gathering of Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto, then in the sign of Libra. And you can see that the 2020 conjunctions are basically square to where they were then. A lot of folks born in 1981 will be seeing Pluto square Pluto alignments this year. And there's, again, this kind of square energy of this triple gathering of Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto in 2020, just as it was in 81. You can see Saturn's a little shy of Pluto there. In fact, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction at that time wasn't until 1982. So this year, Saturn and Pluto conjoin very soon in a theater called You. The date is January 12th, the 23rd degree of Capricorn. And the last conjunction of the two, again, was in 1982. So here we're looking at conjunction, opposition between the two. There was a conjunction in 1947, without an opposition in 1965, right around the time of the Uranus-Pluto conjunctions. Saturn and Pluto last conjoined November 7th, 1982, the 28th degree of Libra. And in 2001, there were 3 oppositions between the two, around the middle degrees of Saturn in Gemini and Pluto in Sagittarius. We've seen this energy relating our time now to 1981, 1982, and that year also featured something similar to what we will see in 2020 and what we saw in 2001. So 2020, 2001, 1982, this is something we're going to dive deep into in regards of sun and moon. So I want to look particularly at one event of this year, 2020, and how 2020 is member to many years within perhaps the period of the greatest astronomical alignment of our lifetimes and for a very long time. Sun and moon, months, right? Hey, why don't we start our months with new moons? This strange rhythm, or sometimes seemingly anti-rhythm of Gregorian madness. Well, the truth is, to have a calendar that starts new moon is a tricky thing to do, especially if you want to also keep the year. But why do we start our years with a date January 1st that's not astronomical? I mean, why not start with a function of Earth and Sun, like an equinox or a solstice? And of course, January 1st is close to the December solstice, but not right on. This is where I was at December solstice 2019. The Three Kings, or Tres Reyes, the 3 wise men, the 3 magi, the 3 astrologers, who it is said were the first Gentiles along with the shepherds to see the newborn king on Epiphany, right, which now is celebrated after the last of the 12 days of Christmas, Epiphany being January 6th, and I'm recording this right around that time. This was the night light show at Chartres Cathedral near Paris, France, and it was an amazing thing to see. The light show actually started with the signs of the Zodiac spinning around the rose window in a counterclockwise fashion, which might speak to transits or might speak to precession and the shifting of the ages. We will get back to that. But it was a really amazing show. The signs of the Zodiac replaced by this amazing kind of comet, perhaps the Star of Bethlehem, and these 12 phases of the moon came in spinning around the rose window, and then the Magi appeared following that bright star. So there's been a lot of astronomical and astrological debate about just what this Star of Bethlehem was. I've been reading this book that's pretty cool. It's called The Birth of Christ, Exploding the Myth by Seymour, or Pa Seymour, I guess. Interesting way to write a name. And I want to share a few of the candidates offered in that book for the Star of Bethlehem, marking the birth of the Messiah and the one prophesied to be the King of the Jews. Some have suggested it was Halley's Comet, which came around in the year 12 BC. And that year also featured a census by the Caesar. And if you know the story, Joseph and Mary were on their way to Jerusalem for the census, and Jesus was born in a manger in Bethlehem during their trek, right? So the census and Halley's Comet in the year 12 BC. In 1985, that theory was written about profusely by a man called Fleming from Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Some have suggested the Star of Bethlehem was a supernova, we don't have any recordings of the supernova in the West, but the Chinese and the Korean astronomers recorded a supernova in 4 BC and 5 BC, and some say this was that bright star in the sky. But the truth is, the book doesn't say much about the star, and it doesn't say in any way that it was particularly bright. I mean, in fact, if you think of it, if you know the story, the Magi, and we're not told, by the way, there were 3, simply that the wise men, or the Magi, which really means astrologers, came from the east and brought gifts of frankincense, gold, and myrrh. Those gifts are why people imply there were 3, and we even have name for them in the mysteries these days, right? Well, they came to Herod, the king, and they said, hey, we've seen the sign, we've seen the star, we've come to honor the newborn king of the Jews, which Herod was not too stoked about, right? But he tried to keep a poker face, and he said, well, where, what is this star, and where is the child? And they didn't say anything about the star, but they said that the child was prophesied to be born in Bethlehem, Judea, right? So Herod said, okay, cool, we'll go confirm that that's happening, and then tell me exactly where that child is. I want to honor him myself. And they did find their way to the manger and honor the birth of the son, but did not come back to Herod because they had received in the dream his true intent, which would be to kill this competitor, And you may know the story that many children were killed at that time, which interestingly brings us back to a time before Exodus in a different testament and such. I must say, visits to sacred cathedrals like Chartres have really inspired me to deepen my study of these Christian mysteries. I did not come up in the church, and it's tricky to walk around and find the clues that are clearly inscribed in the statues of saints and such, because it's not a language I've yet learned to speak. I'm on my way. All right, so the thing is, Herod had not seen this star, right? So if this was a supernova or a bright comet, right? I mean, it wouldn't be some mystery. It's basically implied by the Bible that this was something that only the Magi knew how to see. And since the Magi literally were astrologers, I mean, some versions of the New Testament even call them astrologers, we can imagine that this perhaps was some powerful happening that the public didn't know about, but the astrologers did. Like the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in the first degree of Aquarius on December 21st, 2020. Like, this is a big deal that people in our set, will be certainly seeing and celebrating and setting intentions to, wary of, but it's not like the masses or perhaps even the kings of our day would have any gnosis that Jupiter and Saturn will conjoin. And as I said earlier, Jupiter-Saturn conjunction is one of the potential stars of Bethlehem that has been offered up by the astronomical and astrological set. Another is a Jupiter occultation by the moon literally crossing in front of Jupiter. That happened twice in 6 BC, in March and April, in the constellation of the Ram, which some associate with Palestine and Judea, like Ptolemy did. So that's interesting, but Moon-Jupiter occultations, pretty difficult, first of all, to predict. You need a really solid astronomical science for that, to track Moon's latitude as well as longitude, and especially the pairing by latitude of Moon and Jupiter to have an occultation. And maybe more importantly, especially in this area of the world, those Moon-Jupiter occultations were just way too close to the sun to even be observed. That doesn't mean we could not observe them on a chart, yeah? So another offering was a Venus-Jupiter conjunction of June 17th in the year 2 BC, right? So, I mean, how could it be 2 BC, 2 years before the birth of the Christ, if this marked the birth of Christ? Well, the idea is, first of all, we have our AD BC thing wrong, because this was calculated to be the time of Christ's birth by Dionysius, a priest of the church. And he missed 5 years in his calculation. So many automatically go back to 5 BC for that reason. The calculations, by the way, were determined by a list of kings, and he didn't realize that he missed 5 years for a guy who had changed his name during his reign. I'm just going to leave that there for now. Many have suggested that King Herod died with an eclipse in 4 BC, and therefore this couldn't have happened in 2 BC, which is after the death of the king that was clearly mentioned in the Bible. Some say Herod's death, however, was actually aligned to the January 10th 1 BC eclipse. Anyway, there's a lot to be said here, but I do want to read some arguments by Ferrari di Ociepio, which again I've read in The Birth of Christ, Exploding the Myth by Paul Seymour, PhD. So in response to this idea that it was a Venus-Jupiter conjunction, the Star of Bethlehem, Ociepio wrote in 1991, Saturn, not Venus, was considered to be the planet of the Jews. Pisces, not Leo, which hosted the Venus-Jupiter conjunction mentioned before. Pisces, not Leo, was associated astrogeographically with Palestine. But we heard earlier that Ptolemy associated Aries with that area of the world, but there are many ways to pet the cosmic cat, are there not? All right. The star Regulus was always in Babylonian astrology linked with the ruler of the homeland, which at that time was the Parthian king. Now, why Regulus? Because that Venus-Jupiter conjunction mentioned before was also near Regulus, and this cat's making arguments against that as the case for the Bethlehem star. He also says in the Middle Ages, Jewish astrologers, or we should say mystics or Kabbalists, linked expectations of a Messiah with conjunctions of Jupiter and Saturn in Pisces. Right, so you likely know that one of the things that differentiates Jews and Christians, like religiously, although they're both celebrating the same God as spoken of in the Old Testament for the most part, that the Christians believe the Messiah came and that this was Jesus Christ, and the Jews believe that he has not come yet. And there's often calculations for just when that day will arrive. And in the Middle Ages, some keyed this to a Pisces-Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. And so this cat's argument is that, well, if Middle Age astrologers were looking to a Pisces-Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, why wouldn't the astrologers at this turning of the millennia, when Christ was said to have been born, looking for a Pisces-Jupiter-Saturn conjunction? All right, so conjunctions of Jupiter and Saturn are far less frequent than conjunctions of Jupiter and Venus, and therefore are more significant. Now, I mean, that's an interesting argument, right? Is rarity equal significance? If so, 20 years between Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions in days of modern astrology is not that rare. But in the day, when Saturn was the slowest visible planet, right, and still is that, when Saturn was the slowest known planet, this 20-year Jupiter-Saturn conjunction was the greatest period of a synod, which means meeting between planets. All right, now we're looking at Uranus and Pluto every 130 to 170 years. We can do the last time Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto got together in Capricorn like they will in 2020. We're going way back, like thousands of years. And anyway, today we're going to focus on a 25,000 year, 25,920 year cycle, right? We're going to go for the big long picture. All right, anyway, one more argument. In long-term predictions of Babylonian astronomy and astrology, latitudes of planets were not considered at all, is this argument. Thus, it would have been possible neither to predict minimum distances between two planets at any expected conjunction, nor to include this in astrological forecasting. Now, that's technical speak, I understand, but I just want to make an argument against that. And why this came into the argument is that Venus-Jupiter conjunction in 2 BC was like really close, these two bright planets that got so close. Now, some people who apparently have never watched a tight conjunction between planets, like, well, I won't name names, have written that when Venus and Jupiter come together like this, it's like one star that's 5 times as bright. That's wrong, okay? If it's an occultation in the case of Venus and Jupiter, Venus would literally hide Jupiter from our eyes and it look like Venus, okay? This argument that the ancients weren't looking at latitude is just wrong. I mean, the Babylonians have a rich transmission in regards to lunar latitude, and if they're looking at lunar latitude, which we'll look at later, by the way, why would they not be looking at planetary latitude, especially if you're looking at the sky? Some conjunctions of planets do look like this. They're in the same degree of the zodiac, the same longitude, but have different latitudes, right? I mean, Seattle and Berkeley are relatively on the same longitude, right? So we could say they're conjunct. You know, that's kind of what we're doing with the zodiac. It's like very two-dimensional how most astrologers are working with it. But obviously, you know, Seattle and San Francisco are not right on top of each other. We need a conjunction in both longitude and latitude. And for the zodiac, longitude is the degree of the sign, and latitude is the planet's distance from the ecliptic. Again, I should wait till we're showing pictures because we are going to rap about that. There's no reason why the ancients wouldn't have known this, right? And when you're looking at a conjunction of two planets, like I've gotten so excited for them and I've gone outside and it's like, no, I mean, I don't know, right? And then sometimes it's like, wow, a near occultation. In fact, as we will see in a bit, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction of 2020 on December 21st is very near to an occultation. The planets are super close to one another. It's going to be an amazing thing to see. So let's look at some of these candidates. For the Star of Bethlehem, this is a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in 7 BC, all right? And they're actually very close to one another here. It might not look like it, but we're very soon zoomed in. That yellow line is the ecliptic. It's the path of the sun. This is Jupiter and Saturn as seen from Bethlehem, at least according to the wonderful astronomy software called Stellarium. This shows that the two have southern latitude, Saturn more south than Jupiter, so it's not an occultation where Jupiter would literally hide Saturn from our view, but pretty close. And this was a very special time, and we'll get back to this, when the Aries point or the East point had precessed into the constellation of the fish. And many see that as the criteria for the dawning of the age of Pisces, and that this is what the birth of the Christ is about, that it's the avatar for this new age that began around this time, sometime between 20 BC and 20 AD. And it could be even a wider set of years depending on where you believe the fish's constellation begins. And that's a kind of a longer wrap that I don't want to get into so much right now. We'll look a little bit into it later as we look at precession of the equinoxes and the turning of the ages. All right, so some say that it was this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in 7 BC, or actually there were 3 of them, on May 29th, October 1st, and December 5th, in the sign of Pisces. And at that time, that also meant in the constellation of Pisces, that was the great Star of Bethlehem. The Magi followed, not only to the time, but also to the place. So again, I recommend this book, The Birth of Christ, Exploding the Myth by Paul Seymour, PhD, Frost. It's pretty cool. I just found it on a shelf randomly, as I do. All right, so 3 conjunctions between Jupiter and Saturn, 3 great conjunctions in the sign and the constellation of Pisces in 7 BC, just when the ages were turning to the beginning of the Piscean age. And this is a really powerful happening too. Remember I said earlier that in a sense, this great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn of 2020 begins this 200 years of the air sign, right? But we look back and we see in 8081, there were Libra conjunctions, 2000 Taurus, okay? So Taurus was like the last of the earth, and 2020, now we're going full stop into the air. But we could say that started in 8081 with the Libra conjunction. I mean, dig how 7 BC, there was a similar thing going down, okay? We had been in 200 years of water sign conjunctions of Jupiter and Saturn. There was a little spark of the fire in 26 BC in Leo. And then that kind of last drink of the water with the 7 BC Pisces conjunction, a triple conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, meaning they met 3 times. And then full stop into the fire, right? Well, kind of. Actually, I'm not showing this, but in 54 AD, there was one like very last degree of Pisces conjunction that was so close to Aries, but wasn't. Anyway, so this was kind of like this turning of the elemental epoch of the great conjunctions between Jupiter and Saturn at that time in 7 BC, where some have seen that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction as the mythic Star of Bethlehem, and we're having a very similar situation go down in this year of 2020, although that would relate, 2020 would relate more to this 14 AD, and the 7 BC would be represented more by the 2000 conjunction in Taurus, if we wanted to do a proper analog. Well, 2000, the turn of the millennia, very close to 2001. That's a date we'll get back to. So Seymour and this, the birth of Christ, exploding the myth, suggests very close and within the realm of those 3 Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions of 7 BC, he likes September 15th. And the reason why was this was the date, at least on the books, of a Jupiter acronychal rise, which basically means that Sun was opposite Jupiter, and therefore Jupiter and Saturn, because the 2 were conjoined, were rising at sunset, okay? So this could be the Eastern Star. At sunset, you see Jupiter and Saturn rising together in the east, is the argument. Now, do you see them? Not really, right? Because it's still too bright out. But as it gets dark and as we move into the twilight, into the evening, there's Jupiter and Saturn right together. And the time when the sun finds their opposition to an outer planet like Jupiter or Saturn, or in this case, Jupiter and Saturn, they become what my friend Adam Gainsbourg calls midnight star. And I love that, because the idea is in the middle of the night when the sun's at the bottom of the heavens at the IC, Jupiter and Saturn together in this case would be at the midheaven on high. All right. So this is a bit I've recently added to this presentation, just some suggestions by others of what that Star of Bethlehem might have been. It sure seems to me that the Star of Bethlehem was Christ himself, born of the Virgin, right? So this is one of the reasons why Seymour in this book likes September 15th. Not only Sun is opposite Jupiter and Saturn, because they're in Pisces, the Sun is in the constellation of the Virgin, or of the priestess, Virgo, right? And we're told that this was the Son born of a virgin. Well, that's interesting to me. He doesn't quite go there in this book, at least to where I've read so far, but I won't be the first to say, I think Christ said it himself when he called himself the Son of Man. Let's use Son of Human there. And Christ is the light, is literally the sun of our sky. Now, some like September 11th, 3 BC, because that was aligned to the Feast of Trumpets, and I'll leave that there, although we'll look back to a different 9/11 later on. All right, so back to Chartres we go. These 3 wise men, these 3 magi, these 3 astrologers following that mysterious star to the birth of the sun. There are many sun mysteries and many others at Chartres. Some I've seen, some I have not. This one I learned from Scott Onstadt, who I love so much, who shows that these 2 towers of the sun and the moon have clear demonstration in their measurements if we use English feet, as they're now called. 365 of them gets to the golden ball on the weather vane, which above on the taller tower has an image of the sun. So interestingly, it's in the north, and we could get into a whole discourse around left side, right side, and things. But let's just say there's about 365 days in a year, and the sun tower at Chartres is 365 feet tall. How many days in a month? About 28. And the moon tower is 28 feet shorter than the sun tower. Amazing. All right, we're going to tune into the so-called royal portal here on the southwest face of Chartres. And into this central bay, an image many astrologers will be familiar with. Going there on December solstice was such a magical thing for me. I had heard that the cathedral was aligned to the solstices, and it's not to the solstice sunset or sunrise azimuths, but I have told that on December solstice at sunset, the sun, before it sets into the horizon, is at the right height and the right line to illuminate the cathedral through that rose window right above this image of Christ on the throne. Sadly, when I was there this year, or last year, December 21st, 2019, it was raining out and too cloudy to see that phenomenon. And so I couldn't confirm whether or not it is indeed a thing. All right, so Christ on the throne. In the vesica piscis, the fish's bladder, the mandorla, the sacred almond, the yoni, the gate of creation. Holding a closed book and pointing up, right? His fingers are broken off, but we can assume, as we see in statues all over this church and many others, that Christ has this interesting posture happening, right? He's surrounded by the four beasts of the apocalypse, or of the dream, of the revelation. And some associate them with the four evangelists. Many astrologers associate them with the four fixed signs: the eagle representing Scorpio, the angel Aquarius, the bull Taurus, and the lion Leo. And interestingly here, the bull and the lion are actually reversed, at least astronomically speaking, and therefore in our astrology charts, which are a function of the living sky, my friends. So why is this? And I mean, I've been tripping on that for a while, and I really appreciate a comment that I read recently from a new friend, Romulus, who said, hey, it's because he's pointing up, and this is and holding a book, right, of earth downward, and this is a story of polarity, because Aquarius and Leo, belonging to the air and the fire set, are signs that go up and out, while Scorpio and Taurus, of the water and earth set, down and in, right? So when we see the closed book, it says there are clues here. You'll have to open this, or perhaps the time is not yet for this to be revealed. But if we go over here to the right bay, as it's called, we will find all of the signs of the zodiac and their associated monthly labors. So I'm reading now from Chartres Guide of the Cathedral, which is a really cool book. It says it was revised by Malcolm B. Miller, but it doesn't say who it was written by. Being an extract of work honored by the Académie des Beaux-Arts. Okay. So anyway, this is a really cool book. If you go to Chartres, get this. Sadly, it doesn't show enough pictures, but if you're standing there in front of the picture, it's telling you like what every statue is. And I'd never heard of the monthly labors associated with the tropical signs, so it was really cool to read these. We'll start with Aries, and basically you have the labor below the glyph that I'm showing on the left, and above you can see the ram, right? And the labor for April, holding in both hands the branches of a tree covered with blossoms and leaves. Trees, like many here at Chartres, that kind of look like psilocybin mushrooms, not that I would know. Anyway, above this we find the bull, and below the bull, the labor for May, a falconer stands near his horse, a falcon on his arm. All right, above, the sign of Gemini is actually missing, but the associated labor is not. June mows his hay. We're going to go to the lower left here and see a couple more of those interesting trees representing July. A harvester cuts corn with a sickle, and above, the crab, which looks very much like the Kephra, like the scarab beetle from the Egyptian mysteries here, right? Which is a pretty cool association because, of course, in the Northern Hemisphere, where Chartres and Egypt both are, the Cancer ingress, at least in the tropical zodiac, means June solstice, the height of the light, right? So the beetle is often associated with the eastern place because it pushes the sun up into the sky. But it's interesting to see maybe an older association of Cancer crab as beetle here. All right, we go up to the lion above and below. August unties a sheaf of corn. His flail is seen behind him. All right, above there, the priestess representing Virgo, Virgin, and below, September, a man treads grapes while another empties a basket into the tub. All right. In the lower right, you see Libra. This statue used to hold scales, but sadly they have broken off. And below, October knocks down acorns. We go above there to find Scorpio. I mean, a really interesting scorpion here. And I wish I could zoom in for you, but basically the scorpion is kind of like vomiting water. I mean, it is a water sign, of course. There's some kind of idea of purgation going on here. And it's something that we see often in alchemical woodcuts, that image of like lions or two-headed beasts, like vomiting. So interesting to see that here in Chartres. The associated monthly labor below Scorpio is a man with an axe slaughtering for the feast, which is the monthly associated labor in this imagery with Sagittarius. So you see the centaur, the archer at the top here, and just below and to the right, we have the monthly labor of December. A man and a woman sit at a well-provided table, right? So the winter feast. All right, so now back to the bottom again. This guy kind of looks like a lion at the very bottom of the inside, but that's actually Janus, the two-faced man who looks back to the old year and ahead to the new year, the labor of January. And above we see the sea goat here, Aquarius. Much of the water bearer has broken off, like the legs, but you can still see that water stream. It's just kind of interesting happening given the theme of Christ's ascension, which is what this whole door is about, as I think you can see. So below Aquarius is the February labor. Hooded, warms himself before a fire, the coldest month in the Northern Hemisphere. And then we go up here, and the Pisces statue, at least for the sign, is missing, or rather it's not here. Below we find the associated labor, March, prunes the vines. Okay. So why 12 monthly labors, but only 10 signs? Interestingly, there's also only 10 of the 12 disciples here below Christ at the bottom. And we see 4 angels, maybe again marking the 4 evangelists, maybe speaking again to polarities because 2 of them are pointing fingers up and 2 down. I mean, there's a chance that Christ himself, who was said to be born at the dawning of the age of Pisces, is here representing Pisces, the one who was born the good shepherd and the Lamb of God, but became the fisher king and taught men to fish and walked on water and performed miracles of fish and such. I mean, maybe Gemini, the missing sign, is represented by these 2 angels at Christ's side. Kind of seems like a stretch. Anyway, the ascension door, and we're going to find the missing signs if we look over here. Not to the central portal, those are the fixed signs, right? No mutable signs there. They're over here. This is the Nativity Portal. of the royal portal. And I mean, there's so much to see here. There's the Annunciation, the Visitation, the Nativity, the announcement to the shepherds. But I want to focus on this very outer curve. I'll bring a star in to show you. We're going to look at the 7 liberal arts, the trivium and the quadrivium with associated masters. So this is Aristotle here below the star with dialectic. Above, we find Cicero and rhetoric. And above, Euclid and geometry. Over here, Boethus and arithmetic. Ptolemy on Chartres Cathedral, pretty cool. And above, looking up, is astronomy, and likely looking at least towards the north celestial pole. Grammar and Donatus. And then on a different curve, we find the great master Pythagoras, and above him, music. So 6 on the outside and the 7th inside. And the question then is, well, what about the reflections of where Pythagoras is, where we see some more interesting tree mushrooms? This picture I took, but I'm just not tall enough, so I found one online for you that will reveal that below those interesting trees is a Pisces fish. And we see the fish with the tie that takes it, of course, to the other fish of our sky, but not shown here. And this is not like many others at Chartres, statue that broke off, like the leash was always shown, but another fish was not created. I mean, there's some sense that like that tie of that fish is coming down to the observer, but some have suggested that this is an indication of the age to come, where we will transcend duality, and there will no longer be a heavenly fish and an earthly fish, but just one fish that brings those two energies together. Wouldn't that be a beautiful thing? But speaking of the study of duality, what about Gemini? And you see above this Pisces glyphs 2 men behind a shield. The shield tells us the truth that these are 2 Knights Templar. And some suggest that they represent Gemini, the twins, so that the 2 missing sides from the other door, Gemini and Pisces, these 2 mutable so-called double-bodied sides, are over here on this side, somehow related with the 7 liberal arts and with, and this is very important, with the nativity. So there are some zodiacal mysteries here right on the front door, at least if you enter from the southwest, the royal portal of Chartres Cathedral. We have 10 signs with Pisces and missing. They're shown in a different place. And we have this interesting switcheroo with the fixed signs, at least astronomically speaking. And we're going to see something similar inside the cathedral. So we walk in and we see this beautiful labyrinth. I did not take this picture. I found it online. The labyrinth was covered with chairs when I visited. Go on a Friday, okay? The labyrinth amazingly has 11 levels, and it maps to Ptolemy's universe, which was, for the most part, the accepted cosmology of the time of the building of this cathedral in 12th, 13th centuries. So Earth, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, stars, Zodiac, God. That's, you know, the basic idea. And yeah, I'm looking forward to returning to this cathedral and really spending some time in the study and spending some time to like sit and meditate. I couldn't so much this time because they were tuning the organ and it was just like mind-blowingly like loud. So the frequencies were great because they were ringing the church, but the cat wasn't holding a note for long enough for me to like hold myself long enough, which just speaks to a lack of my training. We'll ring that one out. All right, so back here in the cathedral, we will find some interesting zodiac mysteries on some stained glass that exist right across from this astrological clock. Now, I took this photo on December 21st, and you can see the sun at the top, and it's actually in late Capricorn. And the moon at the time was certainly not in late Virgo as it's shown here. I found that the clock was set about 15 days fast. No, 25. It was set for January 15th, I think, if I remember correct, a late Virgo moon reflecting Capricorn sunlight. I don't think there's a clue for us there, maybe spirit speaking, but I think this is just, you know, clock mechanics from back in the day. Anyway, that clock is facing this. Stained glass in Chartres, amazing, legendary. Nobody can figure out how they did it, you know. This is one of my favorite panels because it is the Zodiac. At the very bottom are the benefactors who paid for this stained glass to be made, and at the top is Christ. We see him next to the sea goat on your right here, right? Because we're told that Christ was born a Capricorn. And then the feast, it looks like to me a labor associated with Capricorn, although outside it was Janus. Anyway, zoom back out again, and there's something off with this Zodiac, which you may have noticed. We're moving quickly here. I'll just kind of blow this up and show that after Aries is Gemini, and then Taurus. So they flip Taurus and Gemini around. It then continues Cancer, Leo, etc. Everything's in the right order except Gemini and Taurus were flipped. And here we see Gemini associated clearly with two nights. So the signs are on the right and the monthly labors are on the left, except for the fixed signs in the middle who have the labor and the sign combined, like Gemini. But Gemini's not a fixed sign. So outside we saw these mysteries like the missing Pisces, the missing Gemini, and then we saw fixed signs kind of mixed up. And here we see the same. We see Taurus replaced with Gemini, so some Gemini oddity and also oddity with the fixed signs, right? Which would read from top to bottom, Scorpio, Leo, Taurus, Aquarius, if this hadn't been mixed up. What's going on here? And I can't tell you exactly, but I will say it's interesting, and I found this really powerful, that the cathedral is bringing our attention to Gemini. And not just because I call myself Gemini Brett. I'm that top window shown in blue Scorpio. But because this resonates deeply with a mystery I've been after in study and transmission for many years. Something that was first taught to me by my first teacher, Daniel Jamario of the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, at least regards to two places of the sky. But now we're looking at the other side, and I guess I'm getting ahead of myself. So back to these towers of the sun and the moon, and let's bring those together in 2020 to focus on one lunation that begins with the June solstice. Before I go there, I'll say that, you know, new moon is the symbol of a beginning of a month. A beautiful thing for us to do intentionally is really about three bodies, right? Earth, moon, and sun. We should never forget where we are looking from. And I believe these three, earth, moon, and sun, are indicative of matter, soul, and spirit, and are what Hermes refers to as the three parts of the philosophy of the whole world in the last rubric of his Emerald Tablet. June solstice 2020. And we see an eclipse here that I think can tune us into the magic of Mercury's caduceus staff. This is an eclipse on solstice day or night, depending on where you are. I mean, we're very close to the actual solstice event. You can see the moon and the sun together at 0 degrees and 21 minutes Cancer. So about a third of a day after the sun ingresses Cancer for the longest day of the year in the northern hemisphere and the longest night of the year in the southern hemisphere. And this new moon conjoined sun in our zodiac, is close enough to the lunar nodes to produce an eclipse, to very close to the nodes. So what's that about? Well, first a shout out to my beloved Anna Zaharia. You see our logo here at the bottom, Gemini, Brett, and Scorpiana, for helping me bring some of these visions out of mind space and into form through illustrations like these. I then get to dissect them and make these animations that we see often in my presentations and such. So this is an illustration of geocentric, Earth at the center, image of the lunar nodes, and a little more. So look to the right, we see the moon and the sun. This is a new moon, right? They're in the same longitude, the same degree of the zodiac. But as I was saying before, just because Berkeley and Seattle are like the same longitude does not mean that they are truly conjunct. They are not the same place, because there is also latitude. Latitude, sadly, is not considered enough, I feel, in modern astrology. And it will come in, I believe, more and more. It's certainly something that we experience when we look to the sky. And it's something we experience almost every month, because when moon comes between Earth and the sun, as it does every 29.5 days for new moon, we don't always have a shadow show. And that's not just because we're not in the right place to see an eclipse. It's literally because one is not happening. And the reason is that the moon does not travel on the ecliptic. What is the ecliptic? It is the plane of Earth's path about the sun, which means from Earth's point of view, the plane of sun's path about Earth, and through the signs and constellations of the zodiac. And the moon has a different path. The two are shifted by about 5 degrees. So the moon and the sun have to meet near either the north or the south lunar nodes for us to experience an eclipse. Like at the image that we're looking at here, from the northern hemisphere's point of view, this would mean the moon above the sun. And the southern hemisphere would see the moon below the sun, right? Wrong. We wouldn't see it at all, right? The moon here buried in the beams of the sun. I mean, these old prophecies of 3 days of darkness for the moon, it's true every month. The day before, the day of, and the day after new moon, which truly is a no moon, right? Unless it is an eclipse. And again, eclipses for solar eclipses are new moon near either of the lunar nodes, which are the crossing points of the moon and the sun's paths from Earth's point of view, or a lunar eclipse of full moon near those nodes, where the sun will then cast the shadow of Earth onto the lunar surface, so the mirror is shaded, right? All right, lunar nodes. We'll do a little bit more with them, but for now, I want to look into the truth that this June 21st, 2020 solstice eclipse in the 1st degree of Cancer is an annular eclipse. And that'll be surprising, because the truth is, the closer to a node a new moon meets, the more likely the eclipse is to be total. And this is very close to the node, right? The node's at 2907 Gemini, and just 1 degree and 14 minutes away, we find the new moon of June 21st, 2020, a solstice eclipse. So how is this the ring of fire? And the answer is that the moon is not always the same distance from the Earth, as we shall see. These are eclipse limits. This is a really great table to have on hand. A solar eclipse will be total if the moon and the sun meet within 9 degrees and 55 minutes of either north or south lunar node. Wait a second, we just saw one that's 1 degree and 14 minutes. That's certainly less than 9:55. So why isn't it total? Well, hence the asterisk, total or annular. What is annular? An annular eclipse is the ring of fire, right? So it's just as strong of an Earth, Moon, Sun alignment as a total solar eclipse, but the moon is not big enough to eclipse the entire sun, so we get the ring of fire still around. That's called the annular solar eclipse. There's a lot of powerful mystery here. We just had one on Christmas in 2019, and we can see in a chart, just to do a little sacred astronomy, tech work with y'all. Through the aspect of the new moon to black moon Lilith, whether or not it will be total or annular. Let me say, I can see in the chart why this is. I don't know the exact numbers because things are tricky. For example, orbits are not circles, they are ellipses. Like Earth does not orbit the sun in a circle. We say the sun is 93 million miles away. Well, that's the average. As I'm recording this in Epiphany in January 6, 2020, the Earth is actually closest to the sun right now. So let's say my hand is the sun and this is the Earth, you know. That means as a whole, the Earth is warmer at this time, which is, you know, beneficial for the northern hemisphere because we're in the longest night, winter. Wait a second, that's not right. There we go. Northern hemisphere winter in the sun. So seasonal like averages are a little easier for the northern hemisphere because we're closest to the sun at the beginning of winter and we're furthest from the sun at the beginning of northern hemisphere summer. The opposite is true for the southern hemisphere, and I'll take a break just to send some love and prayers as I have been sitting and doing daily to Australia, where things are on fire during their hottest time of the year right now. So prayers for rain and rain from our eyes. Yeah, it's that rain from our eyes that'll bring rain from the skies when we open our hearts and tune into the one heart of the world. All right, so speaking of water, the water sign of Cancer, it's at this time, it's usually around July 4th every year when the Earth is furthest from the sun. That's called Earth at aphelion, far from the sun. And at that time, literally, the sun is smaller in our sky. Now, that's a very hard thing to see. The sun is great mystery. We can't stare that without getting burned or maybe even going blind, you know. But it is true that the Earth is further from the sun in early July and late June, and therefore the sun is a little smaller in our sky and therefore easier to eclipse by the moon. So why is this not a total eclipse? And the answer is because the moon is too far from the Earth. So we'll tune into true black moon Lilith, okay? Which is an interesting name that has been aligned to a dark foci of the moon-Earth relationship in the sky. What's a foci? Orbits are not circles with one center. They are ellipses with two focuses or two foci of energetic amazement. For the moon-sun-Earth situation, one of them is within the Earth's bounds and the other is just this empty place in space, at least visually, but there's a very significant energetic happening there relating moon and Earth, which in my cosmology is soul and matter. It's a big deal. When we look from Earth through true black moon Lilith, we are looking towards the lunar apogee, which is the part of the moon's elliptical course around the Earth, this one greatly exaggerated, that is furthest from the Earth. And for me, if moon is soul and Earth is matter, when we see moon Lilith, we're speaking to times when souls are a little less excited to incarnate, rather preferring to stay connected to the all, to the mysteries. I could bring in Lilith mythology to speak about why I feel this resonates, but I hesitate and there's other things to share. I will just say that the opposite side to true black moon Lilith on the chart is the lunar perigee, which means closest to Earth. So it's when moon is at perigee that we have the so-called supermoon. Biggest, brightest, closest, fastest, highest of the high tides, where at apogee, moon can join true black moon Lilith, smallest, dimmest, furthest, slowest, lowest of the still very high tides, which happen right at new and full moon times. And of course, moon can be at the apogee or the perigee, not only at new or full moon. The full moon perigee is in some ways what some have come to call the supermoon. All right, so moon actually has to be close to perigee, right? And therefore close to Earth to be big enough in our sky to occult the sun disk, to totally eclipse the sun. And, you know, there's no greater example than this one. Here we have a new moon so close to the node and a time when the sun is smallest in Earth's sky, which is always early July, and June 21st is pretty dang close. We have that new moon in Cancer square Lilith you see here. So it's actually moon's average distance from the Earth and still not big enough in body to eclipse the entire sun. All right, so a bunch of astronomy there. It's not the last we'll do, but at least let's take this into the mythic space to have a breath. Apollo's bow. Now, Diana's bow we see every month. Who is Diana? She is the moon, right? I was saying earlier that new moon, unless it's an eclipse, is like no moon. We don't see her, right? But the next day or the day after that, in the sunset west, we see that sliver smile of the moon, right? Pointing to the sun. It's Apollo, it's Diana's bow, right? The moon's bow. She's aiming arrows at her brother who is just set down below. Do you know the story of Apollo and Diana's birth? So their mother was Latona, or in the Greek Leto, where they would then be Artemis and Helios, or some of the Greeks still used Apollo. So Latona was pregnant with Zeus's child. Turned out to be these twins, who turned out to become our sun and our moon, Apollo and Diana. The gig was that Zeus's or Jupiter's new wife, Juno, was not too stoked about this other woman carrying his child. So she conjured Python, this monster dragon, to chase Latona away. Like, you know, no pause, no safety to give birth. So she received some help and she found her way to a sacred island. Well, now sacred because it is the place where the sun and the moon were born. Of course, not in that order. Who is the astrological ruler of midwives? The moon, right? And Diana's first gig as midwife was literally delivering her brother Apollo. So Diana, the moon, was born first. And just like the moon delivers sunlight here to Earth, right? Diana delivered her brother Apollo, the sun. Now he had it out to seek vengeance against that dragon who had chased him in his mother's womb. And so he hunted Python down at the oracle in Delphi, which is now Apollo's oracle, because he slayed the dragon, okay? So Apollo's bow shooting an arrow through the dragon. And this is in a story of eclipses. So there's Apollo's bow, right? The beautiful photos of the recent Christmas eclipse. Actually, I have the wrong date here, because in Saudi Arabia, where this was photographed by Shawdi al-Rifai, it was actually December 26th there. It was December 25th in California, where I was, though. And so we see this, there's the beautiful images of the actually moon departing from the ring of fire, and I hesitate to tell you why. I can see that this is the eclipse ending in the east. Yeah, we'll move on from there. I always want to teach. Anyway, this is Apollo's bow, right? We see Diana's bow every month. It's that first visible crescent waxing new moon in the sunset west. And we see Apollo's bow much more rarely. It is formed by the moon occulting part of the sun, yeah? So Apollo's bow and the arrow and the dragon brings us back to the story of the nodes, all right? This is the image or the glyph that we use for the south lunar node, K2, the dragon's tail, which is actually found on the dragon's head, at least on the king cobra's head. Now, in Hellenistic times, I've been told it was this glyph that was actually used for the north lunar node, the dragon's head, which in a sense seems to make more sense. Anyway, we were looking earlier at this diagram of a geocentric or earth-centered point of view of the nodes. Let's look for a second heliocentrically, sun-centered. Because of course, this is the model that we learn in school. It is closer to what's actually going on out there, not from Earth's point of view. And actually Moon, which is 3/11ths the size of Earth by diameter, is more in like a binary relationship. So together they're performing this beautiful snaking, weaving choreography as they orbit the sun. But we'll use this model of Earth about Sun and Moon about Earth. Earth about Sun the year, Moon about Earth the month, right? So as we saw in the other geocentric image, the Earth's orbit of the Sun, or from our point of view, Sun's orbit of the Earth, is the ecliptic plane. We can extend that towards infinity, and we encounter the 12 constellations of the Zodiac, which skirt that ecliptic. So from Earth's point of view, the Sun is always held by one of those 12 star groups. And also, so is the Moon and Mercury and Venus and Mars and Jupiter and Saturn and the ones we can't see too, for the most part, right? None of them are exactly on the Sun's path. All planets have nodes, right? So here's an image of the lunar nodes. We see here the Moon in what's called northern latitude, right? So like if the Sun at some time was kind of like, you know, maybe it's equinox and the Sun is shining above Earth's equator, the Moon would be shining up somewhere north of there, right? Northern latitudes. And every month the Moon will snake from the north of the Sun's path and cross at K2, the south lunar node, to south of the path, and about 2 weeks later cross back from the south to the north at Rahu, the north lunar node. I think I just misspoke. K2, the south lunar node, which we used to call the descending lunar node because we were looking from the northern hemisphere. And Rahu, the head of the serpent, the north lunar node, where the Moon travels from south to north across the ecliptic plane. So we're looking here at the Moon with northern latitude. And that's seen here too in this geocentric image we were looking at. The Moon here has northern latitude. How can I tell? I see that I've got the Earth positioned with the North Pole up, and the Moon from that orientation is above the Sun, so north of the Sun. Now the Moon's course, which I like to call the path of soul, or the circle of soul, differentiates from the Sun's course, the path of spirit, by a distance of about 5 degrees. So at the nodes, right, where the paths cross, the lunar latitude is 0, and the most significant lunar latitude, either north or south that the Moon can have, is about 5 degrees, sometimes up to 6. And it peaks out at what are called the bendings, right? Because that's where the Moon, after crossing the Sun's path, about a week later will bend and come back down to cross again, because every month the Moon is snaking above and below the path of the Sun. And this is why the serpent symbolism and the dragon symbolism with the nodes, which you can see here just in the body of the slithering snake, okay, the dragon. So Apollo's arrow, right, is the alignment of syzygy, the alignment of the three things, the three parts of the philosophy. In the case of a solar eclipse, Earth, Moon, Sun, or a lunar eclipse, Moon, Earth, Sun. And the truth with the nodes are these are places where there is always an arrow going through the center of the Earth and through these crossing points, these nodal points of the relationship of Moon and Sun, of soul and spirit. All right. So I will claim that that Moon-Sun snake from Earth's point of view is one of these caduceus staffs that our Hermes holds. And that the other one is a similar snake, but not of Moon and Sun, rather of Sun and Earth, of spirit and matter. Now this is a lot to look at. I kind of want to build our way up here. So we're going to look to first the primary motion of Earth. What is that? Earth's spin, right? The diurnal rotation, once in 24 hours, bringing us such hits as sunrise and sunset, right? Spins about an axis called Earth's pole, right? The axis of our rotation. And that axis defines the directions north and south. Now, perpendicular to them is the east and west plane, right? I like to call the axis the spine of Gaia, or the sword of our soul, and the plane of this rotation, the circle of matter. Because even though it's brings us sunrise and sunset and moonrise and moonset, it's all about the motions of Earth. The astronomical term is the celestial equator. We'll look back to that. Now in the northern sky, this west to east spinning of Earth is seen as the stars spinning east to west or counterclockwise about the pole star or the North Star, which in our day and age is Polaris, right? It won't always hold that name, and that's something we'll get back to too. I hope you're enjoying this trip because we've really just begun, my friends. So this is the primary motion. I mean, interestingly, astrology these days is definitely primarily concerned with the secondary motion. The primary motion is the daily motion, the diurnal motion, the spinning of the Earth. It shows up astrologically in our delineation through astrological houses, which are different from different surface places on the Earth, where the signs are measured from the center of the Earth. And the signs are more related to the secondary motion, as we will see. But the signs rise and reach and rest and root every day because the Earth is spinning the primary motion. So here's that spine of Gaia, the sword of our stone. It's emanating from the heart of Earth where we are all connected, and it projects up through the North Pole, the North Terrestrial Pole. That's why Santa lives there, by the way, and that's a tale for another time. And it points up to a pole in the sky, the center of the starry rotation. That's called the North Celestial Pole. And I pushed the wrong button, so let's do that, and a little bit of this. Okay, cool. All right, so the North Celestial Pole. If you're at the North Pole, it's right above your head. If you're at the equator, it's on the horizon, and that, I think, is a tale for another time. Let's travel from the heart of Gaia along the sword of our stone through the Earth's south pole to the south celestial pole in the sky. Just imagine lying on the south pole, bring a coat, and look up, and there is this place that I like to call the South Pole space. Now, the plane of this rotational motion, this primary motion, is called the celestial equator. I think you can see why. It's literally Earth's equator projected out into space. Now, if you're laying on your back at the equator, that's what's right over your head, you see, although it's spinning, and the poles are on the horizons, on your sides, and at the equator, the whole Earth spins kind of like a wheel, whereas if you're at the North Pole, it's spinning like a big top. And most of us live somewhere in between those extremes. Anyway, I like to call this the circle of matter, again, because it's really a motion that's all about the Earth, matter. The tropical zodiac is a function of that plane in the way that it interfaces with the plane of the secondary motion, which is the annual motion or the yearly motion, Earth's orbit about the sun. Or from our point of view, sun's annual orbit about us, moving through the signs and the constellations of the zodiac, which, by the way, are different things. And we'll get back to that too. I like to call this plane the circle of spirit because it's where the sun lives. And every year we see that sun snaking about the celestial equator. Why are these planes not the same, right? And the answer, as you most likely learned in school, is that the plane of the rotation, the primary motion, is tilted in respect to the plane of the orbital motion, the annular motion, the secondary motion, right? So the planes of day and year are not the same. They're tilted by about 23.5 degrees, which is why our globes usually look like this instead of this. Interestingly, it's actually more like 23.4 degrees, which means the measurement from the other angle would be 66.6. But we're not supposed to say 666 around here. Anyway, the Earth orbits this way. It moves from the west to the east. And that's why from Earth's point of view, we see the sun doing the same. All right, so the sun goes that way. from Aries to Taurus to Gemini to Cancer, etc. Let's look at that a little bit more. But before we do, I've oriented our view to the ecliptic, right? So here's the view with the celestial equator or the Earth's daily motion kind of orienting the image. And now we're going to shift. So it's the plane of the annual motion. That's our principal orientation. And I do this because I want to show you something very important about the tropical zodiac. Many will argue because the tropical signs do not equal the constellations, which is very true, that astrology is not astronomical, which is, what's the technical term? Bullshit. The tropical zodiac is an amazingly, actually simple astronomical device based upon the relationship of the planes of day and year. Now, so are the seasons. And we often say that the tropical zodiac is the seasonal zodiac. And yet, we don't often, some astrologers do, I don't, most don't, reverse the nature of the signs between the northern and the southern hemisphere despite seasonal opposition. So that's a tricky thing for tropical astrologers to face. The way that this code is cracked is the truth that the tropical zodiac is not seasonal, but rather emanates from the same foundation that the seasons do, which is the directions. Like so many other wisdom traditions, like shamanic traditions, the tropical zodiac is a system based upon the energies of the cardinal directions. So dig this, right? We're looking at North's pole here. And that's, again, pointing up to Polaris, right? So I can go outside tonight and I can find Polaris, which is there where I'm sitting, and 38 degrees above the horizon because I'm at 38 degrees north latitude. And I can go walk towards Polaris and I'm walking north. And if I stay the course, I will eventually literally walk from here in the Bay Area to Seattle where I used to live. And I can continue on to the North Pole, right? Now, understand that as I'm walking towards the North Pole, actually the star will look like it's getting higher in the sky. I have not yet mastered like levitation and don't have anything for flight. So it's not like I'm going to walk straight towards that star in my sky. I'm going to walk on a line on my ground that's, the star projects down to, right? So where is that star on my horizon? So I just want you to agree with this particular argument that I can walk north without walking towards the North Celestial Pole. The same argument will apply here. This, for the ecliptic, is the north side. And it's not like due north, it's not that star in the sky, but just like I can draw that star down to my horizon, I can also draw that star down to the ecliptic plane. So I'm going to put north over there with the 0 Cancer degree, or the June Solstice place. We'll see more about this in a bit. And the idea is that that is the place that is north of the center of Earth. And it is the place where the northern axis of Earth is always, always leaning, okay? The opposite is true for the southern axis of the Earth. It's projecting to the south side of the ecliptic, which would be 0 degrees Capricorn. Now this is even trickier, but we can then draw east and west here. And see, that's why is that trickier? Because east in the Bay Area where I'm sitting right now, right? So I could go outside and see what's rising or cast a chart and see what's rising. It's going to be what was east like 3 hours ago in New York, and it's going to be what will be east a couple hours from now in Hawaii, right? Like east and west are very relative to where you are on the surface. But when I draw these directions of the tropical zodiac and align them as I am to the solstice, which I hope you can see, but then to the equinox point, a bit more of a risk, I'm speaking about measurements from the heart of Gaia, the center of our planet, which I can't really point to. And that is the place we measure astrology from even though we live on the surface and witness the heavenly happenings from here, we're measuring astrology from the center of our planet, the one place where we are all connected. Now, the sun gets to the east point once a year. And it's the time that we call March equinox, right? And we say in the tropical zodiac that this is when the sun ingresses Aries, right? Many say that this is the beginning of the astrological year. Why? Most will say from a very seasonal thing that this is because it's the spring equinox. We spring forward. Now light has overcome the night. Well, that's a northern hemisphere trip, y'all. And if we don't want to reverse the energy of our signs for the southern hemisphere, we have to agree that there's something else going down. And the truth is, what is going down or up is that the zodiac, the tropical zodiac, is a function of the directions. And 0 Aries ingress for the sun, or that point, always, is due east of the center of Earth where we are all connected. It works like the ascendant for the entire globe, right? The ascendant here in the Bay is different than it is in New York. It's what it was in New York a few hours ago. It's what it will be in Hawaii a couple hours from now. But I'm talking about like the Eastern energy for the entire Earth. And that is the east point 0 Aries, right? So global east point. In the east, if you sit outside, you will clearly connect to the truth that the east is the energy of the rise. New beginnings. The sun rises in the east, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn too. Why? Because Earth is falling in that direction. So just like we descend into matter to lift the spirit up, the earth falls towards the east to lift the heavens up for us earthlings. Now, we're going to get back to this idea of the doctrine of astrological ages, which is about where that Aries point, the tropical 0 Aries degree, is aligning to the constellations most suggest. And we'll look at a couple of different theories for what besides that it could be. But this is why that turning of the ages or astrological age doctrine is a thing. Whatever is due east of the center of the earth where we're all connected is our shared ascendant. And there is one constellation-ish due east of Earth for about 2160 years, a month of the great year, or an astrological age. Interestingly, the diameter of the moon is 2160 miles. Anyway, I digress. So sun ingress Aries. Now, know that signs and constellations are not the same thing. This is super important, and it's another challenge to astrology. It is like the challenge that the astronomers stop with. They're like, your thing, it's not true. You think you're an Aries, you're not aligned to the ram. No, but they'll say Aries, right? Because they believe the zodiac to be a constellational thing. That's not the truth of the tropical zodiac. It's not about any stars either than our own, which isn't to say that the so-called fixed stars, I'm not trying to suggest they are not contributing to us energetically in any other way. And they're very important because they will help us know where the signs are currently aligned. But the tropical signs are not about constellations at all. They are tropical. They are of the earth. Okay, so I'm looking here at the Aries constellation, which I prefer to call Ram. This is something we learn in the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School. We use names like Ram, Bull, Twins, Crab for constellations, and names like Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer for signs to differentiate the two because they're very different things. We'll look more into that. I just want to show you this glyph that we use for Aries. Like most of the glyphs for the signs don't look like the constellations they are associated with. Now, Anna created this glyph and our set of glyphs using like circles and lines, which is a beautiful thing. And it's a little bit more stretched than how most people draw Aries today. So we'll go over here. I mean, I could truncate that thing. People often draw Aries like that, which looks more like the ears of the bunny than the horns of the ram, interestingly Easter bunnies come to mind. Anyway, let's just like cut off a side of that, and maybe that's the Aries constellation. I'll show you that the Aries glyph is actually about the energy of the East. I mean, interestingly, the constellation of the fish looks more like our glyph. But here's the trip. This works best at the equator, but it works everywhere. If you sit east and just watch how the skies work, stars that rise south of east will head to the south, and stars that rise north of east will head to the north. It's the permanent fountain of youth. In all moments of time, the stars rise like the horns of a ram, and they curl back around like the horns of a ram to set in the west. I am convinced that this is why the ancients brought in the energy of the ram to speak of Aries, because tropically speaking, it is the eastern sign, or at least it's where Pisces becomes Aries, right? That's due east of the center of Earth. And actually, I won't do it right now, but if you took the ground away, the whole motion goes like this and describes the Pisces glyph with a horizontal line for the horizon. I have a whole different presentation that demystifies the glyphs that we use as a teaching of sacred astronomy. Now, Pisces, we can also do this to make the Vesica Piscis. So we should get back to that idea of Christ sitting on that throne, I guess. But it's a little more astronomy first. The Earth will then see the sun move from Aries to Taurus. And I stop here to just point out a couple things. One is the line of the shadow of Earth, which is called the terminator, is different every day, right? So this is one of the facts of tropical astrology, or the tropical zodiac, at least like from the sun's sign perspective, right? And so that's a seasonal thing, yeah? But from a directional standpoint, also, very importantly, I stopped here where the sun from Earth's point of view is like 15 degrees Taurus, halfway between 0 Aries east and 0 Cancer north. This is the only moment of the year when the sun will be pulling Earth northeast in respect to the spine of Gaia, which always points north. So imagine being, is this okay? Yeah, I'm going to ask Sekhmet permission to do a demonstration with you. Sekhmet and some iPhone earbuds. So imagine you're hanging out here with me and asking consent. I tie this like leash around your waist, okay? And then I ask you to walk circles around me, and I'm pulling on this string, and so you're feeling that pull. So if you're facing me the whole time, you're just kind of, we're looking at each other and you're being pulled towards me, right? But the Earth is not, if you call like the northern lean, or anywhere else, but let's call the northern lean, it's not always facing the sun, or else we wouldn't have seasons. It's always facing the north, right? So now imagine I've tied this leash to you, and this is the idea of the sun's gravitational pull, or maybe it's electric or magnetic or all of those things, or something that we know nothing about yet, or whatever. So imagine I'm pulling on you, but you're facing the same direction. Now, at some point of the year, I'm going to be pulling from your back, at some point from your right side, right? On the other side of the year, from your left side, or sometimes from your like back left or whatever. It's an entirely different sensation, isn't it? Every day of your yearly circle. And this is true of the sun-earth relationship. This is a truth of the tropical zodiac, which is just a very simple like physics proof of these energies, which for some reason we divide into 12 signs. That's a very interesting thing. We could say 365 days, every day is different. And in this image where we're stopped, it's the only day of the year when the sun pulls the earth from northeast, and it'll happen again a year later. Sun sign astrology demystified. Let's move along. Earth continues her orbit, and we see the sun move from Taurus to Gemini. And at that time, and I forgot to add a slide, so I just want to show it very importantly now, right? This is the time Gemini ingress Cancer, which we call summer solstice in the northern hemisphere, right? Or winter solstice in the southern hemisphere. right? The northern axis is leaning at that time right towards the sun. It's always leaning towards 0 Cancer. And so this is the time where it's the height of the light in the northern hemisphere and the depth in the southern hemisphere. So I'm created this animation to show you the mysteries of the Gemini glyph and set it for Bethlehem on June solstice in the year 1 AD. Okay, we could do this any year from June solstice, or in the case of the northern hemisphere, that's summer solstice, right? And this is really important because this is going to get us back to this powerful 2020 eclipse, right? June solstice for the northern hemisphere is the height of the light. Some have called this the glory of the king. All right, and from there, the light will descend for 6 months, okay? This is one of the Gemini glyphs lines. It's going down. And then we get to the depth, right? The lowest sun of the year, the lowest midday sun of the year, and therefore the longest night for the northern hemisphere at December solstice, usually December 21st, right? Why don't we begin our years there? And you know what? Why do we begin our years in this northern hemisphere created calendar when the night is longest? I mean, January 1st is very close to this time. January 1st, interestingly, is actually the midpoint of Christmas Day, December 25th, and Epiphany, right? When Christ was revealed to the Magi on January 6th. Trip about that a bit. At the end of the 12 days of Christmas, which do not start before Christmas, that's like a modern consumerism approach, but rather start on the day of Christmas and count 12 from there. And then is the Epiphany, Tres Reyes, 3 kings. We'll get back to that. All right, so here we are at December solstice, right, which is the depth of the light. And then the goat is born to climb back up the other side. So my suggestion is that the Gemini glyph shows the sun going down, the midday sun getting lower for 6 months, solstice, or the Greek for solstice, which means sun stops in Latin, which stops going down and starts going up from one perspective. The Greek is tropicos, for which our tropical zodiac is named, and also the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn. Anyway, so the goat is born to climb that mountain. I mean, maybe the sea goat even to go from the depths of the oceans all the way to the top of the mountain. And the goat's got a long way to climb. And though December 21st, the solstice is the stopping in tropicos, the turnaround, it takes some time to shift from, stopped and to start moving again. It's really a few days. I mean, this is something we notice most on the horizons. I'm not showing this glyph, but the Cancer glyph is the sun moving 6 months south and 6 months north, like on the sunrise east or the sunset west. And so we can really track solstices there when the sun's rising at its southern extreme. That's December solstice, and it will start moving north for 6 months. But it takes some time to pick up speed. It takes a few days. And so the celebrated birth of Christ, at least since the Council of Nicaea or so in the early 4th century, as December 25th, is the birth or the rebirth of the light. So we start our days in the middle of the night because that's when the sun begins its daily climb, even though we first witnessed this at sunrise, right? And we start our years, at least from the Northern Hemisphere's perspective, at the middle of the darkness too, or the beginning of the birthing of the light, the birth of the sun. Wait, oh right, the birth of the Christ. Now you may know that Mithras, it is said, was born on December 25th of a virgin, and that Horus was born on December 25th of a virgin. We'll get back to the Horus story earlier. The Christian church was very true to a practice of conquering places, but then recreating their mythos and their wisdom into new stories of the kind of Christmas story. So this is very likely how Christ's birth got tied to this, unless we just want to say this isn't a myth at all, and Christ was born on December 25th. And while I will say it's not a myth, for me, Christ is not some, person. I mean, maybe, because the sun can do whatever it wants to, but literally is the sun, and a new sun. And we'll talk more about new suns in a second. I'm just remembering, I want to like start this fall from the height of the light or the glory of the King once again, because here in June solstice in the year 1, right around the time of Christ's birth, dig how the sun was like being held by those twins in the sky. Does this have something to do with that Gemini glyph mystery or the Gemini statue mystery at Chartres Cathedral? If you pay attention, you'll see an eclipse in the year 1 or 2 coming up. So anyway, here that goat is born, but really begins the climb around Christmas time, the true birth of the sun, you see. And 6 months now, getting higher and higher, northern and more northern, which is higher and higher in the northern hemisphere, and then being held again there, at least at that time, by the twins. In our time, June 21st, the June solstice, the northern hemisphere summer solstice, is in a very different place of the heavens, and an interesting place at that. We will get back to it. Okay, so in review, the astronomy of the tropical zodiac is about the interface of 2 very real astronomical planes. One is the plane of the day, the primary motion, and the other is the plane of the year, the secondary motion. They intersect at the equinox points, and they most diverge at the solstice points. So there's a seasonal thing happening here, and what I'm saying more globally speaking, a directional thing happening here. Earth's tropical zodiac, and I will argue that every planet has its own. Why? Because every planet has a different relationship between the plane of day, which is spin, and the plane of year, orbit. Like Uranus is doing this kind of thing. Venus is spinning barely at all. And the same for Mercury. Jupiter spins really fast, but mostly I'd be looking at the tilt angle and the in respect to the orbital plane. So Mars is pointing to a very different star than Polaris. And that pointing for Mars would project to Mars's 0 degrees Cancer, which in my book, and I'm sure this is right, has nothing to do with any like star or constellation, but simply has to do with directions which are aligned differently on Mars or Venus or anywhere than they are on Earth. Every planet has its tropical zodiac based upon the interface of the planes of day and the planes of year. Now the question is, how do we get from these very real 4 points of astronomical, like, you know, there's nothing obscure about this. And I know it feels complicated, but this is actually very simple astronomy. How do we get from these 4 points of equinoxes and solstices and get to 12 signs? Now, some will say because of 12 months a year, but depending on how we count or how we define a month, that's either 12.369 or 13.369, and that's definitely a tale for another time because we've gotten tech enough. I want to get back to the snakes, but I just will give an answer in the back of the book. I will say that there's 12 signs because creation creates in 12s, and the compass and the square, the work of sacred geometry, and the instruments, the work of musical and sacred harmony, have a lot to say about that. So now back to this image of the serpent. Remember, we had our moon snaking above and below the sun's path from Earth's point of view for our moon sun snake, one of Mercury's caduceus staffs. And here we will see the sun starting at March equinox when the sun has what's called a declination of 0 degrees, okay? And we're going to see the sun orbit the Earth from a geocentric Earth-centered point of view in the course of a year. Now, the illustration is not to scale, or at least it's not necessarily true, because we will see in this animation the sun moving all through the 12 signs, which is a year, but in that time, the Earth would actually spin 365 days in a little bit, right? And that's not going to happen. Haven't figured out that level of the animation yet. Anyway, this idea and what you see in that sine wave at the bottom is a measurement of sun moving through the signs, longitude, but the shifting through declination, which is a measurement north or south of the celestial equator, the circle of matter, okay? So the sun is on that circle. The sun is on the cross, this cross of year plane and day plane at every equinox. And interestingly, the crucifixion, the sun on the cross, we're told is at Eastern time. Easter time. Time. See, the sun is due east of the center of the earth. And we saw the whole thing of the Aries glyph is the bunny's ears, right? But that actually, the bunny of Easter traces back to fertility and other things, but let's just honor that the sun is indeed on this cross of day and year planes at Easter time. Actually, the church had to, after burning us at the stakes, had to start dusting off the old astrology books because they did not have the right calculation for the number of days in a year. And so Easter was slipping from the equinox. And when they got this course corrected, we shifted from the Julian to the Gregorian calendar. And at that time, the current definition for Easter, which hasn't been adopted everywhere, but is this really cool thing, the Sunday after the full moon after March equinox. So it ties in like the magical days of the week, and there are planetary associations. Sunday, the day of the sun, Christ. The lunation, earth, moon, sun, right? Full moon, and the year, earth, sun, equinox. I love that. All right, so the sun on this cross, and the sun will get away from this cross as it moves into northern declinations through the signs Aries, Taurus, and Gemini, getting more north, peaking at Cancer, bending back, crossing the plane at September equinox at the southern extreme at 0 Capricorn. And you can rewind and watch that again, but let's do it together one time. This is the snake of the sun in the annual motion about the Earth crossing the plane of Earth's spin twice a year at the equinoxes, right? So we saw the moon snaking above the Earth's plane from Earth's point of view, and here's an image of sun snaking about the Earth's plane. So soul and spirit on the right, the lunar nodes, and spirit and matter on the left, the very real astronomy of the tropical zodiac. And, you know, we can compare actually the equinox points of the tropical zodiac to lunar nodes. Do you see? Just look at those images on the left and the right. The nodes for the Earth-Sun relationship are the equinoxes. This is the transmission of the tropical zodiac. The bendings, right? So for the moon, bends when it's furthest away from the sun's path to cross again. For the Earth-Sun relationship, those are the solstice points. And this relationship between lunar latitude and solar declination, okay, like the lunar node picture on the right and the tropical zodiac on the left, that's birthed like this pretty cool device that we call the draconic zodiac. That's a tale for another time. But it's based on this idea that nodes are like equinoxes. There's another thing that's really important into the interface of these two happenings. The lunar nodes transit the zodiac in retrograde motion most of the time in a period of 18 and a half years, or 18.6 years. Or actually, let's not forget 18.618 years, because 0.618, of course, is part of the golden number. Anyway, the transit of the nodes about the zodiac will do some really cool things to the moon that we've come to call the lunar standstill cycle. When the true north lunar node is at 0 degrees tropical Aries, we have what's called the lunar maximums, okay? Because if you can think of this in regards to that lunar node diagram, that means the northern bending, right? Here's North Node in Aries. The northern bending is at Cancer, which is already the most northern point of the tropical zodiac, which is a directional thing. So in the northern hemisphere, the sun at 0 Cancer, or Jupiter or Saturn or whoever at 0 Cancer is at the highest height in the sky for that particular planet's happening, because 0 Cancer is in the northern hemisphere the highest point of the zodiac. Now, if the northern bending for the moon is there, it gets another 5 degrees higher than the solstice sun can. So every 18.618 years, about the 0 Aries point gets to, or the node gets to 0 Aries, the northern bending at 0 Cancer, and the moon goes to places the sun can only dream to go. Significantly, what's called out of bounds. A phenomenon that can certainly not happen during lunar minimums, and this is defined by when the north lunar node is at 0 degrees tropical Libra. Right here, the northern bending is at 0 Capricorn, the most southern point. So we take the furthest southern thing and we bring it more up towards the north. There's like kind of a balance, and I'm getting further into this than really I should. I will just say at maximums like this, places like Callanish in Scotland, or Chimney Rock in Colorado, or Newark Earthworks in Ohio, or Serpent Mound, there are places all over the globe where the ancients encoded this amazing 18.618 year cycle of soul and spirit and matter, of moon and sun and earth. They are activated by this, and the next time it will happen is when the north node gets to 0 Aries in early January of 2025. But it doesn't just happen on one day. In fact, the moon has to be at a solstice point at 0 Cancer, 0 Capricorn, or nearby to see the effects of this beautiful happening. But we see that it's really about equinoxes and solstices, or I should say east and west point, or north and south point. This year in 2020, on May 4th, the true north lunar node will ingress Gemini, having spent a year, about 1.6 years, in the sign of Cancer. I'm showing the node at 0, 0 Cancer here, but the red numbers in this wonderful software, Astro Gold, signify retrograde travel. That's how the nodes typically move. So the moment after this, that node will be 29, 59, 59 Gemini. And then the node will spend about a year and a half, 1.6 years there before moving backwards into Taurus. Okay. And it's a beautiful thing, this 18.6 year cycle, because taking us in that so-called retrograde motion through the zodiacal order invokes the essence of the turning of the ages, the backward motion of the equinox points through the signs of the zodiac over the course of the great year. Okay, so this is very close to this June solstice eclipse. And it's going to bring us into the magic of another caduceus staff, okay? But let's just honor how staffy, caduceus-like this eclipse is, okay? Because here we have an eclipse, right? Which means the sun and the moon are coming together, right? This the moon-sun snake, the nodes. And it's during a solstice, which is when the sun-earth thing is most diverging, right? Like the bendings, the solstice points. So it's not a node with a node. That would be like during a lunar maximum if we have an Aries or a Libra eclipse. But it's still this kind of, this invoking of the magical energies of the moon-sun snake and the sun-earth snake. All right. I know this gets kind of advanced. I want to actually invoke the serpent's head, or rather tail, to get into the idea of another serpent now. So, and we're going to utilize the power of the sidereal zodiac to do this. All right, so we'll look at this later. But very importantly, there's at least 2 zodiacal philosophies that are popularly in use by astrologers today. Tropical, which is the earth zodiac, and sidereal, which is the star zodiac, or the heavenly zodiac. There's another philosophy, the astronomers, which is that the constellations are the zodiac, and we'll look at all three in a beautiful illustration later on. But for now, I'll just say that the sidereal zodiac, which is utilized by so-called Vedic astrologers in India, Jyotish astrologers, some suggest it's a better name for that craft, some not. But there's also a rich sidereal zodiac tradition in the West. Most sidereal zodiacs are about 24 degrees shy of the tropical zodiac placements in our day and age, and this changes, and we will get back to that. It's actually the principal theme of this whole thing, but I've got to build up to really be able to get there, so I think we can grok it together. All right, so here we see the south node during this June solstice 2020 eclipse at 29 degrees and 7 minutes Sagittarius, okay? Subtract about 24, and we'll see the sidereal zodiac, and this is a Lahiri, I am Nasser, a Lahiri correlation, by the way, for those of you who speak that language. We'll see that south node at about 5 degrees Sagittarius, okay? Notice that that June solstice in the sidereal zodiac is 6 degrees Gemini, right? Not the first degree of Cancer. Again, we'll see what that is more later. But I wanted to show this, to circle this place of the south node, just to say that this is where, and at least according to some transmissions, the south node, K2, is said to be exalted. K2 is said to rule the nakshatra, or the lunar mansion that lives in this space of the heavens called Mula, which is often symbolized by the roots of a tree and is designated in the heavens by the stinger of the scorpion, which reaches way down south of the ecliptic into southern latitudes. So in the northern hemisphere, like India, it's like really low in the sky. And K2 is about like getting down and in there. And this nakshatra is about that. So K2 is said to be exalted there. So during this June solstice eclipse, we will have an exalted K2 and an exalted Rahu, the north lunar node, which is said to exalt on the other side. Now, some give a very specific degree and say that K2 is exalted at 3 degrees Sag. And some argue that's 2 degrees and change. I'm showing 3 degrees and change here just because I was able to find the south node there right around the time of Leo new moon, August 18th, 2020. And this isn't usually the case, but a cool thing about the Leo new moon this year is whether you're looking at the sidereal zodiac, which we are here, and the new moon's at 2.5 Leo, or the tropical zodiac, where the new moon's at 26.5 Leo, it is a Leo new moon. And I'm just going to go back there once again. This is said to be the exaltation degree, okay, of K2. And I would say that's a sidereal zodiac thing, okay? And one important thing I'll say about the sidereal zodiac, we'll see this deeper later, is like it is always aligned to the stars in the same way. This is not true for the tropical zodiac, okay? And importantly, I just want to show you in our day and age that 3 degrees Sagittarius in the sidereal zodiac is like 27 Sagittarius in the tropical zodiac. So many of you astrologers will go, oh, right? Because what's at 27 Sag is the galactic center, at least in our day and age. And this is going to bring us to a third snake, or snaking motion. And one thing I'll say now, in case I forget to later, is it's pretty amazing to me that K2, the south lunar node, the dragon's tail, is said to be exalted at the very place of the heavens where the galactic center lives. What is the galactic center? This is our idea of what our Milky Way, our galaxy, like our greater city, if you will, looks like. You know, it's like maybe the ecliptic or our solar system, sun, these planets, our friends, are like our neighborhood, and then we live in the city of the Milky Way. Or we could say the city is the Orion arm, and this is the state is the galaxy, or whatever. You can go levels and levels in every direction, right? This is an artist's image, and according to what we believe the Milky Way to look like, based upon our observations of other barred spiral galaxies out there. You can see the we are here, right? And here's one image of another snake, which would be like a sun galaxy snake. Remember that the moon is not on the sun's plane, but crosses above and below, and the sun's not on the earth's plane, but crosses above and below, right? The lunar node picture and the tropical zodiac astronomy, respectively. The sun is said to orbit galactic center and bringing all of our planets, our whole solar system with it in like 242 million years. And some say the Maya had that like number calculated amazingly. But the sun in the solar system plane, which is the ecliptic, it's not on the same plane as the Milky Way. Some have actually suggested, and I think that they're very right about this, that this means we don't come from the Milky Way, but we come from another place that is currently being integrated with the Milky Way. We've seen this happen out there, two galaxies like colliding. And amazingly, that doesn't mean anything has to strike anything, because there's so much space and so little matter, if you will. But like two galaxies will come and become one larger galaxy. And this seems to be happening with the Milky Way and the Sagittarius dwarf galaxy, or the Sagittarius dwarf galaxy, where maybe we are from. I'll leave that there for now, but maybe that's a seed that will sprout in your soil if you choose to water it. Okay, so in 242 million years, in this orbit of the sun of our sun about galactic center, we have this snaking above and below the galactic plane. Now that's a lot to look at. Blessings to Jim Slater, who I found this on Wiki Commons, created this amazingly, dynamic view. We'll see one of my approaches with too much information later on. But I just want to bring you into, well, what does this whole Milky Way scene look like from our sky? This is what we think lives at the center of the Milky Way. Galactic center is a supermassive black hole, the astronomers say. Some say it's the source of creation. That's from a different camp. The black holes spit out these amazingly powerful jets of energy, of X-rays and gamma rays, and also rings along the plane, which is something that some have suggested actually initiates or catalyzes surges of periodic evolutions on Earth. Anyway, this is more like what we see in the sky when we look towards galactic center, the so-called galactic bulge, okay? Where our Milky Way, the river of stars, or the clouds of heaven, like literally, if you go out away from the cities and you see the Milky Way, at first you're like, whoa, look at that cloud. And it's like, oh, wait, actually that's hundreds of billions of stars, right? And there is this bulge. It's also the cosmic serpent that always surrounds the Earth and bites its own tail. So hopefully you can see the mouth of the serpent there. In the last couple of years, both Jupiter and then Saturn made the eyes of the snake, which were really cool things to see. It won't happen again for, well, about 12 and 30 years respectively. All right, so have you seen this? I mean, anytime you search like photo in the heavens, like this comes up. But in our bright city lights, that same area of the sky usually looks like that. Or like this even, like very few stars. So moral of the story, get out of the city, go drink the Milky Way. I mean, some human beings will never see the Milky Way again in their life. I grew up in Vegas. It's like the most criminal light pollution place on Earth, literally my nemesis in that regard. But having visited recently, I found that I can drive only like 45 minutes away from that obnoxiously lit city and see the Milky Way. So I hope you will remember to go, let's just see it again, right? Go inhale these lights of our, greater neighborhood, hundreds of billions of stars. They say more than the grains of sand on Earth. Because this is a pretty sad picture, But still, if we know how to connect the dots, we can find our way to galactic center. Because the tail of the scorpion and the arrow of the archer point right there. Now, there are two glyphs that we use. The arrow for Sagittarius, which has this interesting line through it. Oh, which, by the way, is just the tilted polar axis in respect to the ecliptic plane. But anyway, there's only two glyphs that we use that have arrows. And so one is Sagittarius and one is Scorpio, the M with the arrow, right? So you're going to turn that around the sky to map the scorpion. But fascinatingly, those two arrows of these constellations that, you know, are traditionally associated with these signs, they point literally to the galactic center, which the astronomers call Sagittarius A star, okay? So this is a fascinating thing. I always taught it was like one of the great giggles or coincidences of the heavens. I completely disagree. This to me is a clear indication that the ancients were entirely tuned in to the truth that that place is like the source of so much energy. Galactic center. Now, importantly, it's not right on the ecliptic plane. All right, that's yellow. It's going through the star Zubin El Janubi on the right, the fulcrum of the scales. It goes above the heart of the scorpion Antares, one of the 15 brightest stars and one of the 4 royal stars. And for some reason, the International Astronomical Union in 1930 decided that that star should not be on the ecliptic plane because Ophiuchus, the serpent tender, is so close by. But he doesn't have any bright stars near there. And I will just say, jumping to the answer in the back of the book, at least the one that I project, is that this was a clear kind of time release attack by the IAU in 1930 against astrology. Tale for another time. But what I'll say here is there's a very beautiful thing. Not only did the arrow of the archer and the stinger of the scorpion point to galactic center, but Ophiuchus, the serpent tender, stands there. It's an amazingly powerful and huge constellation, often associated with the great healer Asclepius. And he does stand on the ecliptic plane, though no bright stars nearby. There's actually that one that's not here, drawn by Stellarium as part of this constellational line. So in my book, there's 12 and we only need 12, and I don't need, like, I can see Mula, I can see the stinger of the scorpion in my sky. I don't need constellations above to say, you know, to fill in and have some 13th sign. I say this because you've likely heard of that so-called debate. Creation creates in 12s. Ophiuchus is amazing and stands on galactic center, but not a zodiacal constellation. Anyway, if you know how to connect the dots and you know where the arrows are, you can find galactic center even in the bright city lights, because stars of the archer and stars of the scorpion, like Shaulet, the stinger, are pretty easy to find. Note that, again, Sagittarius A star, the measurable galactic center, is not on the ecliptic plane. Measurable how? I mean, triangulating with Ophiuchus's foot and the 2 arrows, but this is how we found galactic center, right? Using radio telescopes. I should have the galaxy flipped upside down because they were in Australia when those who found Sagittarius A star. We don't have that. The ancients didn't have that, right? So the ancients might have been working with a point that was different than that galactic center. Why not work with the visible cross of the ecliptic, okay, which we know because it's the path that the planets, for the most part, and definitely the sun, take through the sky. And let me just say a thing about that. You're not going to tell what and where the ecliptic is by looking at the sun. So many people will say, oh, you want to know what age you're in? Like, wake up on spring equinox, northern hemisphere trip, and watch what constellation the sun rises in. I've heard so many astrologers teach that, and it's like, okay, clearly you haven't done this. And I went and did it once, actually. I was like, okay, cool. And then I was like, right, I should have thought about that, because when the sun rose, I couldn't see shit. By the way, this is one of the answers to why the 12th house is hidden things. When the sun rises, not in the first, but into the 12th, as it does, all the stars go away. So that's not how we find the current astrological age, right? What we do is find the place of the zodiac that's rising due east. And it's easiest to find around June solstice time, story for another time. But here we're looking at this very important cross. And this is the cross that we are going to see the sun on at solstice in our day and age. And this is the most powerful astronomical happening of our time. That's taught in the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School. It's taught by my own independent research and to great researchers and teachers before I found astrology, who I will mention in a bit, at least my favorite one of them. But, you know, if you know where the ecliptic is, and you can certainly find it not by watching the sun, because the sun will burn and blind you, but like watching the moon, and she gets 5 degrees from the sun, but watching Jupiter over the course of his 11.86 year orbit, right, of the sun. We see Jupiter moving through the signs and the constellations of the Zodiac, and he stays within about 1 degree of the ecliptic plane. So Jupiter's an amazing teacher of the circle of spirit, which shouldn't surprise us. So we can certainly learn where the ecliptic is. You can learn to see it. You know, once you know that Spica and Zubin el-Janubi and Antares and Alnisil and Caus Borealis and Dormus and, you know, Hydor, like there are stars that are closely aligned to the ecliptic. So when you go outside at night, you can just draw that curve and learn to see it. And the planets will help be guides, okay? And if you're far enough away from the city, you'll see this magical space with the mouth of the Ouroboros, where the cosmic serpent bites its own tail, is like aligned to that ecliptic. And there's a very powerful alignment in our day and age. So once you learn to see the snake, you can see galactic center, like the radio telescope galactic center in the back of the snake's mouth, right? Sagittarius A star. But we're also, I think, should be, and the ancients probably were not interested as much in that, you know, radio telescope measured place of space. Though again, the constellations that they drew in these dots of the sky do have stingers and arrows that point right there. But, you know, they were probably very interested, as so am I, in this cross of the Milky Way, which we also call the galactic equator. Right? I mean, it's just literally the plane of our galaxy. And as we saw before, it's not the same as the plane of our solar system, the ecliptic, the sun's path. So during the sun's 242 million year orbit of galactic center, there's another snaking motion here. Okay, there's another interface. Like, I didn't even show it before, but celestial equator and ecliptic. I guess we did see that. For the node, the lunar node point of view, the circle of soul, the circle of spirit, the path of the moon and the sun, right? And here, sun and galaxy, solar system and galaxy, right? So another serpent, right with the cosmic serpent, the Ouroboros, the Milky Way. These things are amazing. I'm actually going to take the Ouroboros away now so we can just kind of more clearly see that exact crossing point. This is one of 2 galactic crosses, which always stays in this constellational zone, okay? And in our day and age, and this is not always true, this shifts with the so-called tertiary motion of Earth, which we will get into. In our day and age, the south point, where Earth's southern axis is always leaning towards on the ecliptic or the zodiac, the south point, 0 degrees tropical Capricorn, is at this galactic cross. All right. And this is the most powerful alignment of our day and age. I am sure of it. I was taught this by John Major Jenkins, who we'll speak about in a bit through reading his books. And I'm very glad and fortunate to have spoken with John before he passed, sadly, recently. And I was certainly taught this, as all students of the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School are. So here is the December 21st, 2012 sun on the galactic cross. Have you heard of that date? Do you remember that date? The end of the world? Or perhaps the beginning? Okay, because it was the end date of the long count of the Maya calendar. Now listen, in the Northern Hemisphere, like Mayan lands, December solstice is the rebirthing of the sun. Right? I mean, we're coming from the longest night to the rebirthing of the light. The Maya see in this place of the Milky Way, it is said, Xibalba Bay, the underworld. And there's a very important, maybe the most important, at least the most preserved to public awareness, Maya myth, the creation story called the Popol Vuh. And I'm certainly not going to tell that whole beautiful story, nor could I, but part of it is the rebirth of the sun from this underworld place. I guess I'll just leave it there. And thanks to the hero twins, actually, I couldn't not do that because of those strange Knight Templars on Chartres Cathedral. Anyway, This is also seen as like a birthing place. So the rebirth of the sun, which is an annual thing in the northern hemisphere when the sun finds 0 degrees tropical Capricorn December solstice, is in our day and age, and this changes, and it's only like this every 26,000 years about. The rebirthing of the sun is at Xibalba Bay. And this seems to be the transmission of the Maya calendar. Now, hopefully some of you are out there like, dude, that's not the Maya calendar. And you're right. Okay, this is the Mexica calendar. Some say the Aztec calendar. I'm fortunate now to have seen this gigantic thing in the Anthropological Museum in Mexico City a few times this year. Well, last year of 2019, I guess, if you're into that whole Gregorian trip, man. In this transmission, as with so many cosmologies and calendrical systems of Mesoamerica, I mean, powerful timekeepers, daykeepers, is a transmission. We find one similar, perhaps from a very similar thread through the Hopi, of different suns, different ages. Now, scarily said, it usually goes with some cataclysm, okay? But that an age dies and a new sun is born. And this Aztec Mesoamerican cosmology is very linked to the Maya cosmology. There's very similar calendar systems. This calendar that we're looking at shows the 260-day sacred count, and that's the thing for the Maya too. This is what's called a long count calendar description, a statement of a date and facts about the date. And one of the only places where this so-called end date was found, it's a statue or a stela, Maya stela from Tortuguera. And it's now in a museum in Villa Hermosa, except for that broken off part, which lives at the Met in New York. And this does speak very obscurely about, you know, the end of time. I mean, this is a cycle, the Maya long count, which runs for about 5,125 years. It speaks of creation in the year 3114 BC. I believe I got that right, in August. And that it ends on December 21st, 2012. And yet we found dates on other stela and other inscriptions that are after December 21st, 2012. So this very much looks like to be a rebirthing of the sun. And, you know, many, especially Hollywood, overdid this, but many predicted that there would be a cataclysm at that time. And some of the New Age, you know, and I liked subscribing to this at the time, believed there would be a whole shift in collective consciousness. And, you know, that might have happened. Some have said, you know, I spoke about that kind of idea of the galactic super wave, that there's a chance that children who have been seeded since or literally have a different type of genetic code or something like this. And I don't want to get too crazy New Age with it. I mean, I had a lot of hope in seeing a tremendous shift at that 2012 time. And it happened in my life, and I wonder if it's happened in yours. And the point is, too, that this isn't just an event of one moment. It was written in that calendar that way. But it's actually a period of many decades, and we are in it still. And 2020 brings a very significant happening to the mix. Okay, so the book that I recommend in regards to this most powerful astronomical and therefore most powerful astrological happening of our time is Galactic Alignment by the great late John Major Jenkins, who in his previous work, Maya Cosmogenesis, really showed how this long count Maya calendar 3114 BC to December 21st, 2012 was a prediction of the rebirth of the sun, the December solstice sun, in the mouth of the serpent at Xibalba Bay, that the ancient astronomers, and none exceeded the power of the Maya, right, were seeing that things were changing, and then eventually the December solstice sun, or we can just say the 0 Capricorn point, or I hope you now will hear me say the south point, precesses to this galactic cross. The galactic cross near Sagittarius A star or galactic center. If this is making sense to you, you've already done your homework. Or if it's brand new, I'm doing a really good job here. All right. So moving on. And, you know, sorry to be in such like teacher role instead of just pure transmission if you're waiting for the, you know, the punchline to this joke, which is no joke at all. But I really want to build up, right? So this stuff can fully land, because I'm about to make a statement that might be akin to the idea that collective conscious ascension in the new sun of 2012 might be happening in this year of 2020. And then I'll back up from that statement. Okay, so this is not a one-year event. Now, John Major Jenkins is saying, hey, look, clearly this December solstice 2012 sun is literally in the mouth of the Ouroboros at the Shiboba Bay. The great astronomers of old could have predicted this, and he shows in galactic alignment not only that Maya cosmogenesis, because in his previous book he shows relationships in the creation story, the Popol Vuh. He shows that the Maya ball courts were aligned to this great happening. He shows that the mythos embedded in the ball court and the myths is about this happening. He shows many other amazing things. And then in the second book, Galactic Alignment, and I'd encourage you actually to start there, he also shows Mithric, Egyptian, Vedic, and more Celtic transmissions about this galactic alignment event. And I want to share today, not John's work, some of it, but a thing that I found. Now I should say, and I should have a picture of Daniel Jamario, my first teacher from Shamanic Astrology Mystery School. It was really fun for me to read this book again after I met Daniel and started my astrological study, because Daniel's mentioned in the preface, because he was one of the only modern astrologers who was tuned into this thing, that these solstice points were going to precess to the galactic crosses, this great story of our time. And so it's a very principal part of the shamanic astrology cosmology that's taught in our school. Now, the long count calendar, 5,125 years, about 5 of those periods is just about 26,000 years. So there is a chance, and John Major Jenkins was tuned into this, that these long count calendars were speaking of a transmission of a periodicity that was tuned into the so-called Platonic year, or the Great Year, the precessional year of about 26,000 years. We're going to get there now. But just to show you that this is not just a once-in-time event, let me show you the recent December solstice sun, where I was at Chartres Cathedral, okay? So look at the moon at the top of the screen. That's what northern latitude looks like, by the way. The moon is very far from the node. And I had forgotten when I said that I remembered that Chartres, or saw that Chartres astrological clock was wrong. I forgot where the moon was. I can see in this image it was in Libra, because that star Spica that the moon is aligned to in our day and age is 24 degrees Libra, a very important star when we look to the precessional mysteries, and we will get back to that. So here is the December solstice sun on the cross in 2019. Here it is again in 2020. How can I tell this is 2020? Because there's that date in the lower left. And I'm not talking about the numbers I added there. I'm talking about Jupiter and Saturn, who are so close together in this conjunction on that day that it is it's near to an occultation, like Jupiter and Saturn becoming one. And if you've been here since the beginning, remember this might be linked to the mythical Star of Bethlehem, perhaps described by the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions in Pisces in the year 7 BC. And we're having one again. Now, we have one every 20 years, but just like the 7 BC Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, this one is very significant in regards to the elemental epoch of the so-called Great Conjunction, the alignments of Jupiter and Saturn. And it's amazing to me that this is happening while the December solstice sun, the northern hemisphere birth of the light, and this is why Christmas Day, again, by the way, is right there at the galactic center. And I love that Mercury's there at the galactic cross too, to like transmit this message to all of us. All right. This is like further in the future, 200 years in the future. So look at the bottom left, we see December 21st, 2220. And I just wanted to fast forward to show you that this December solstice sun on the galactic cross is not always a thing, okay? So we don't go too far in the future here, but far enough so that you can clearly see that the sun is not on the cross. Now it is a little closer to, at that time, to where we project the galactic center to. This is a very important lesson about latitude or planets or stars or anything like a black hole or supposed black hole that are off the ecliptic plane. What we do is we draw perpendicular lines from that point to that plane to suggest what zodiacal degree it's in. And again, in our day and age, the galactic center is around 27 degrees Sagittarius. So we still need 216 years of precession. We'll get back to why I know that number to be true for the December solstice point to precess to the galactic center projection. That's a lot of words. That'll happen in around 2238, something like that. But anyway, you can clearly see in this image, converse to the other ones like this one of December solstice 2020 or December solstice 2019. The December solstice sun is no longer in the mouth of the Ouroboros on the galactic cross, right? The visible crossing of the Milky Way and the ecliptic in the year 2220, 200 years from now. I'll take some of this stuff away and I think we'll be able to see even more clearly. But first, let's just say why this is happening. And this is a trippy thing, and I'll show some other illustrations later that can be helpful. But this is the so-called tertiary or third motion of the Earth. The primary motion, remember, is the spin, right? Day. I mean, what's our primary astrological, and I suggest therefore our primary astronomical experience? Day and night. Right? I mean, how do you feel at 3 a.m. versus 3 p.m.? Very different. Astronomy has an energetic correspondence, hence astrology, okay? The primary motion is spin, secondary motion is the orbit, right? So rotation and revelation. Oh wait, I meant revolution. And then there's this third motion, this so-called wobbling of the axis. Now, what it's wobbling on is hard to say, but Newton's theory, which is still pretty hip today, is that Earth has a bit of a muffin top, an equatorial bulge, and that the gravitational forces applied mostly by the sun and the moon are causing the Earth to wobble because of how they pull on that thing. Others have suggested it's simply because our sun is not static in space as we used to think, but it's moving, you know, through the sky, and therefore our experience of the stars are changing with our motion, even though that's a pretty slow thing in regards to that stuff that's so far away. This is what's taught by the astronomers today. And regardless, the North Point is not always pointing to the same star. So Polaris, which is named because it's what? The pole star, has not had that name for long, or North Star, and it won't for too much longer either. And as north and south change where they're pointing in the sky, that doesn't mean north on like your street changes. It just means where that's pointing to in the sky changes as Earth does this. As north and south change, east and west do too. We'll see another image of that in a bit. So here we can just look, as I've taken the Milky Way and the planets away, just look at the 0 Capricorn point marked there with its newer glyph. It's not on the galactic cross in 2220. Nor is it on the cross in 2058. Okay, so this is only 38 years from now, 2 Metonic cycles from now. It's a year we'll look back into. Get even closer to now. Here is 2039, another year we'll look into. Notice that, I mean, it's really close, but the 0 Capricorn point is not on the cross as it is today. And as it was most perfectly in 1998, some say 1997, that is when the crossing happened. Now, but the December solstice sun is not a point, right? It's a disk. And so this precession of the equinoxes is that the signs like 0 Capricorn, those degrees, shift against the constellations at a rate of about 72 years for 1 degree, okay? The sun is a half a degree in our sky, apparently, okay? So for a half a degree to shift against the point, we're talking about 36 years. But the sun is also a very bright beaming thing. And there's, you know, there's arguments that this is like a 50-year happening from about 1975 to 2025. That was easy math using 2000 as the center point. Some say even longer, some give it 72 years. Regardless, it doesn't happen for long. I'm going to go back in time. We'll look at 1982. It's another year we'll look at, not only because that's when Saturn and Pluto were last conjoined, right? Very close to that 1981 kind of triple hangout of Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto that we started with. We'll find another reason that 1982 and 2039 and 2058 become interesting, as does 2001 in reference to the revelation of 2020. But here in 1982, we were definitely within the bounds where the Capricorn of the South Point was aligned to this galactic cross, okay? Going back further, here's like 2050. And you can see it's not there, right? So we are in a very tight window of time where the South Point has precessed to the galactic cross. And this year is a very powerful, right? We're further from that perfect 1998 alignment than 2012 was. John Major Jenkins gives reasons for the Maya going for 2012 over 1998, 1997. That has to do with a visible thing in the sky and in parts of the Milky Way that they found mythical powers within. I'll leave his book for you to read if you want to find out what that's about. But we are still in this alignment. We're not as strongly in this alignment as we were in like 2001 when the whole world changed. Oh wait, let's go back to the cathedral. So why this weirdness with Pisces and with Gemini, the missing astrology signs on the left side of the royal portal? What are these magi, these astrologers pointing us to? And of course, we found those missing Pisces and Gemini signs here. Actually, this is where they are missing from, right? Sorry. We found them in the nativity side, right? The birth of Christ. This is the side about Christ's ascension. And I want to be careful here, again, not to feed some like new age, like diluted overwhelm. I don't want to like fall for that trip that like everybody's just going to shift, you know? I don't want to not fall for it either. I don't want to not rise with that either. Because there are ancient prophecies from so many lands. And again, I cannot highly recommend you read John Major Jenkins' Galactic Alignment enough. And I've read it 7 times, you know, to tune into these many different prophecies. And I'll show you one that is not in his book, one that I found that I think really speaks. We are being told that this is a time of a great shift, a death and a rebirth of a sun. Does that have to happen with a cataclysm? Does it have to happen with an Armageddon? Or does it simply happen with an apocalypse, which means a revealing? Or I guess an easier word there is a revelation. What does that mean? I'm going to show you here why astronomically we have clear truth. And it started actually with these last slides of the December solstice point aligned to the galactic cross. The sun on the cross, you see. Why this is clearly a time in which we live where ancient prophecies from so many mystery traditions said something significant is happening, something significant is going to change. Does that have to mean cataclysm? I mean, we can look around this world right now and some of us are rooting for it. I should say some people are rooting for it because I'm not one of them. I carry hope in my heart and optimism. And I see again and again, and I sit with amazing and beautiful human beings who are in the state of finding the light after their dark night again, or in the state of absolute delusion and confusion on their way from one place to the other, as in a sense we all are. But this shift is upon us. My life died in 2012 and was reborn in a place that I enjoy much more. I'm no longer an engineer working a square job. I'm an astrologer and I dig it, you know. Not as easy on the financial thing, but whatever, we can see that that's going to change too. How does this change look? What is this ascension? Do we leave this plane? I don't think so. Does this plane completely change? Apparently, I don't think it happens like that, but maybe it does. The book seems to suggest, you know. Is it Judgment Day and such? I don't know, but I will say when we start considering ourselves and contemplating ourselves, there is a lot of judgment at first. In fact, it's usually our judgments of self that bring us to self-awareness and help see the shift. And on the other side, hopefully forgiveness is, you know, the calm water on the other side of this tidal wave, right? So what I aim to suggest is that there's a shift, there's a resurrection, there's a very powerful happening, and that somehow it is very much stimulated by this sacred gateway of the June Solstice, Ring of Fire, Apollo's Bowl eclipse in 2020. This is December solstice 2020, just a different look so we can see like the whole zodiac here, okay? And you see that December solstice sun in this year right on the galactic cross in the mouth of the serpent. I hope you can see that now. I hope that language makes sense. Over right there at the first degree of tropical Aquarius, we see that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, that near occultation. We see Pisces moon, interestingly. Mars here in the center of the fish and the sign of Aries. And the twins down here. And I want to look to their feet, okay? Because we've been tuning into this December solstice sun, this like birthing of the light at the galactic cross near the galactic center. And this has been like the principal transmission of John Major Jenkins' work, and also Daniel Jamaro and the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School's work. And the piece that I want to add is actually when we focus down here at the other galactic cross, right? So this isn't the galactic bulge, this isn't galactic center. This is actually if we were looking away from galactic center into intergalactic space, the galactic edge, as I like Daniel calls it, all right? So let's look over in there now. We'll move from this place of the two arrows and get to the other side of the sky, and we will find some powerful beings, all right? Including these Templar Knights. All right, so if we look there, we see the Gemini twins, right, who stand on the galactic cross, just as Ophiuchus does on the other side. And I think Chartres mysteries are bringing our attention here. So there's something about that shield. Now remember, on the other side, Ophiuchus stands at the galactic cross, and on this side, Orion reaches his club up to it. And this is a very important thing always, and maybe especially in our day and age, because the zero Cancer point, the north point, is now aligned to that sacred place of space, to that silver gate. What do I mean by that? I want to go here again. Here to galactic center, the two arrows and Ophiuchus standing there. Some mystery traditions have called this the golden key of St. Pete. Or some the golden gate, and suggest it's where our soul is going. I mean, interesting, the sun of our sun, galactic center, does live there, and you know, maybe our sun eventually will get sucked in. I don't think that's the story. The transmission is usually that this is where we go, like on the other side, when we transition. And that this is where we come from. The silver gate, or the silver key, or the sacred hoop. We'll get back to that. So where this foot of this twin lives, the foot of, interestingly, the mortal twin Castor. How do I know? Because he sets first, you see. And Orion reaches this club. So in our day and age, the North Point is there. And that's, again, this kind of short period of about 50 years we're in. We're still in it. All right. So the June solstice sun, the glory of the king, the height of the light, is right there on Orion's club. It's like, you know, solstice, like snow cones, sun cones. Now, there's a lot to say about Orion, okay? You might have seen Robert Bauval's correlation of the geometry of the three pyramids of Giza, like aligning to the three kings. Oh, sorry, that's a name that is still used to this day to describe the three belt stars of Orion. And I've found in my work, and you can look at GeminiBrett.com at the free teachings page where this will eventually end up at a transmission called Washington Deciphered, where I look and show basically the truth that DC was also Orion aligned, and that the White House Washington Monument and Jefferson Memorial speak to Orion stars, how they're seen from the Capitol building setting, and from the Abe Lincoln Memorial, the stars rise in a vertical pillar on the Washington Monument, which is very phallic, and so is this part of Orion. Now, there's a few things I should say. One is that in Egypt, in Kemet, which we now call Egypt, there's a transmission that the great king, you know, the one who civilized us, the great Neter, Osiris, Asur, brought to us the birthing of the sun. Now, Osiris did not have an heir, and his brother Set killed him. But Thoth, Jehuti, some associate with Mercury, created a magical phallus for Osiris of gold. And his sister, his wife, his consort, his queen, the queen, flew over as a falcon that magical phallus and became impregnated after Osiris's death. And she gave birth to Horus, the falcon, the avenger, who every day defeats his uncle Set when the sun rises, because Horus is the sun. In Egypt, there's no hiding that. Right? He's this guy. And again, it said born on Christmas Day on December 25th, before there was an idea of Christmas, and in this amazing magical virgin birth. So we can see so many images of the Virgin Mother and the child, of Isis and Horus, that seem to they definitely predate, but they seem to correlate to the modern images of the Madonna and the Christ child. And especially at Chartres, they've made them up now so they look white, but traditionally this was like a black Mary and Christ child, right? And it's one of the places amongst many where there seems to be a reaching into the tradition of the worship of the divine feminine through Isis. There's a lot more to say, but we're running out of time, and you've been so present and patient for this marathon anyway. Okay, so Osiris was said after his death to be resurrected as the constellation we call Orion in the sky. And below Orion's belt is Orion's sword, which surely would be the golden phallus of Osiris that birthed the sun, at least gave the magical seed for the sun. And I'm talking the sun in the sky, not just Osiris's sun, okay? So what I'm saying is that the Egyptian mysteries seem to suggest to us that our sun was born in this area of space, coming from Orion's sword or Osiris's golden phallus. The Maya mysteries seem to agree. It said that still to this day, well, I shouldn't say it said, still to this day, Maya shaman, when they set up a hearth in a new home, will take the central fire and bring it to the new home after they've created a hearth with 3 stones in this triangle that symbolize these stars, Saiph, Mintaka, and Regil, the feet of Orion and the easternmost belt star, because it is said that that triangle surrounds the smoke of creation. This is the Orion Nebula, Messier Object 42, which lives right there in the center of that triangle, right in the golden phallus of Osiris, which gave birth to the sun. All right, and all of these stars, okay, which the modern astronomers call the winter hexagon or the winter circle, Capella, very bright stars, Castor and Pollux of the twins, Procyon, the little dog, Sirius, the big dog and the brightest star of our sky, and some say our binary twin. Regal, the left foot of Orion. And the astronomers use Aldebaran, the eye of the bull, the royal star, the marker of the heavens. But the Lakota, Dakota, Nakota utilized the Pleiades on the bull's back for this asterism that they call the sacred hoop. Okay, those same stars, not only in the heavens, but they're also mapped on the land in the so-called Black Hills, like Gemini maps to Devil's Tower, which is a terrible thing to call this place we see in this image, Sacred Tower, the Bear's Den. And it's all there. I really highly recommend reading this wonderful compilation by Ronald Goodman, Lakota Star Knowledge, to tune in here more to this place of the sky, the Lakota know to be the sacred hoop. And like these Silver Gate transmissions, they say it's where our souls come from. So we see in these mysteries from many lands this same transmission. Our souls come from this place. Well, to me, we're being tuned into that Messier object number 42, the Orion Nebula, because I literally believe our sun was born there. Sorry, I have to type a text because this is going so long. So that'll buzz in a second, we hope. All right. And this circle always surrounds one of the galactic crosses. And it can be found here in a much more modern temple, the Capitol building. I received this in a dream. Here we're inside the United States Capitol. This is a statue of George Washington who's looking up at the frieze painted by Bernoulli, and we find this Mexica or Aztec sunstone right there. What? And it's supposedly an image of, all these images are sadly of contact, as it's called, but Cortez meeting Montezuma, which, by the way, never happened. But I mean, we have an indication that the mysteries of these paintings are tuning us into the turning of the ages doctrine. We can see that in another very important way. At the top, in the oculus, is this painting by Bernoulli called The Apotheosis of George Washington. Constantine Bernoulli, by the way, was broken out of Vatican prison, basically, to come over to the States to paint this and to do some other things. This is George Washington, apotheosis. That means becoming a god. And we can see he's surrounded by Greco-Roman gods. You see Mercury up here at the top. This is Poseidon. So I guess I'll speak in the Latin. Here's Mercury, Neptune, and Venus. Here is Minerva. So that's Pallas Athena, if you don't know. Look at this rainbow bridge from Athena to Ceres here. Interestingly, with 7 beams. This is Hephaestus. Okay. And down at the bottom, a modern goddess called America. Look at that posture. What does that look like to you from what we've been seeing? Do you see Orion there? Do you see Washington sitting on Orion's club? What would that rainbow be? We soon shall see. Very importantly, there are 72 stars. 72 years about for 1 degree of precession, which takes us through the turning of the ages. So I went here and I respected it as a temple, and I appreciate the work of William Henry, who speaks a lot about this place as a sacred temple and a stargate. And there's a lot more about that in my Washington Deciphered. You can find it at GeminiBrett.com. But I went here in that mode. And I received this night a dream, and it was from Hermes, who says, hey, don't you see this is the sacred hoop? And this aligns not only like mythically, like the Gemini twins constellation, traditionally associated with the Gemini sign, associated with Mercury, right? And mythically as well, for more reasons that I'll get into here. But it aligns geometrically also. And that rainbow bridge, by the way, would be the Milky Way, which runs through Orion, okay, really over Orion's club. So kind of things get bent or not to scale, but runs from Sirius to Aldebaran, who are here represented by Pallas Athena, basically the goddess that DC is like built for, and Ceres or Demeter. And who is Washington? Sitting on that rainbow, sitting on that Milky Way at the hand of the high man. Wait, sorry, the woman, America. The Celts called Orion the high man and spoke of prophecies of the time when the sun will be on the high man. Now, truthfully, that happens every year ever, but it is only in our day and age when it's the height of the light or the glory of the king that brings the sun on the hand of the high man in the sacred hoop, you see. And here we find an image, a transmission of Washington sitting on the clouds of heaven next to angels blowing trumpets at the hand of the high man sitting on the Milky Way. And it's an image that's today in our age, right? Like the image of the North Point, of the height of the light from the Northern Hemisphere's perspective. It's an older image with Gabriel playing the part, or actually Michael, I think, right? So instead of America's sword, the spear, with Jesus sitting on that rainbow. So there's something in the Capitol building that's also speaking about this precessional 72 stars, alignment of the sun, in this case, Washington, the son of the land, sitting in the sacred hoop on the hand of the high man. So, I mean, this is where, I don't know, I don't want to say too much. I have no idea what's going to happen, but I will say it has been happening, it is happening, and there's something very powerful about this year. And I think it's kind of a year of course correct, personally. And it's about the revelation. And it's about ascension. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. It's very clear. Maybe it's about the second coming. But some have suggested this means, you know, a leveling up in our conscious approach to Christ consciousness, where we understand that we are creators. I listened to this wonderful Alan Watts transmission yesterday. I meant to write this down, but it was a recording, I assume, from some 20 years ago or so, and likely here in the Bay, where he said it will only be a few years before people understand that they are the creator and get the whole joke of this whole thing. And at that point, we will become much more responsible with our technology and utilize it in a loving way instead of a way of hatred and division. I paraphrase, all right? Alan Watts, one of my favorite teachers. Is a time like that ahead? What would have to happen? What has happened in your life to stimulate your shift, your awakening, or I prefer to say aweirdening? Is there something like this that could happen for the collective? Is that even necessary? It feels like it. It feels like we're on a sinking ship. This Capricorn Council that's forming, it really seems like an important statement for us to ground and tune in and get recentered and put our ear to listen to the counsel of the grandmothers and the true voice of Earth, so we can preserve her real traditions for the sake of the 7 future generations. You know, like it is that time. And as they say, we are the ones we've been waiting for. So will this dawning of the new age, the age of Aquarius, bring a new avatar as the last one did with Jesus Christ? Or a new sun? And if so, does that demand some cataclysm of the current light so one can be reborn? Or perhaps is our sun just putting out different kind of juice than it once did? It certainly seems to be true, because by the way, this climate change thing isn't restricted to Earth where humans live. Mercury's changing, Venus is changing, Mars, Jupiter, our whole solar system's changing. It can actually be argued that Earth is actually resisting the change most. And I know that hurts for people who want to take all the responsibility for climate change as, you know, conducted by our SUVs. I'm not saying we should all be assholes and just justify like our belligerent attack of the Earth. We need to get back in alignment, but we also have to understand not to get lost in some political nonsense and lose the thread that there is something not only about our planet, but about our sun that is changing. And it's time, friends, that we change with it. I mean, we might be forced to. Let's do that again. We might not make it. I don't know. And I don't think that's going to happen this year, but I think a very important event of conscious remembrance is going to happen this year. And it will probably feel like a shock if we are not grounded and ready for it, as it did last time. So I start here at 2012 with that December solstice sun aligned to the galactic cross, projecting currently to 6 degrees sidereal Sagittarius. Do I do that in this one? No, but this is the galactic alignment, right? So I actually want to rewind. Hold the phone, friends. We're just going to have to let this go, because I want to speak about what we're looking at first, okay? You can see in the lower left a key, and the lower right, the glyph for Gemini, Breath, and Scorpiona, this time written explicitly, because if you use this, I would like for you to reference us, please. We spent, weeks basically creating this image of the 3 zodiacs. The 3 most popular zodiacal philosophies of our day. In the middle, the 12 constellations, okay? And that's like the astronomer's zodiac. And they make very important arguments that they don't equally divide the sky into 30-degree slices. You know, there's not 12 equal signs, but they don't believe in signs, right? They're talking about constellations. And what I hope I've proven to you, at least for the tropical zodiac, it's a different thing. It's a 12-fold equal division of the ecliptic based upon the cardinal directions. And you can see in the inside in the blue, the tropical zodiac marked with the directions by the glyphs for the signs. The outer ring in purple, where we see written out names for the signs, that is the sidereal zodiac. And the truth is there's many sidereal zodiacs. This perhaps is the most popular. It is calibrated to Spica. I'll say more about that in a second. So tropical of the earth. And I hope I've shown to you that the tropical zodiac is all about the directions which are born from the sword of our stone, the spine of Gaia. Sidereal zodiac of the stars. So the sidereal zodiac is aligned to the constellations. I mean, just look here. Here's Capricorn. Well, that's the archer. Sagittarius, yes, Sagittarius is the archer, right? Sagittarius glyph for the tropical zodiac, it's the scorpion. I mean, Antares, the heart of the scorpion, is 10 degrees tropical Sagittarius in our day and age. Signs and constellations are very different things. And so sidereal astrologers, like the astronomers, like, what are you guys talking about? Like, look up. You know, people write this to me all the time. They're out there with their iPhone apps, and they're like, wait a second, this says Jupiter and Capricorn on my chart, but he's aligned not to the sea goat, he's aligned to the archer. What's going on here? Or they'll say he's in Sagittarius, and so will sidereal astrologers, because they are more of a constellational thing. Now, they're not perfectly constellational. In fact, I am going to move this through time, okay? And we saw, because of the so-called tertiary motion of Earth, this does change through time, because north is going to point in different places. Now, the sidereal zodiac is going to stay aligned to the constellations in the way that it always is, because it's based upon the stars. I'm going back in time here, and I'm going back to the year 304 AD. And the reason why is that this is the time, very close to the Council of Nicaea, interestingly. But this is the time when this great star, Spica, was aligned to the west point, 0 degrees tropical Libra, the Virgo-Libra cusp. And the sidereal zodiac starts with that star, most calibrations. And there's beautiful mythic reasons why, like in the Vedic transmission, why we start with this star. But, you know, if you're a tropical astrologer like me, and I very much honor constellations, and I think we actually want to get down with both the tropical and the sidereal zodiacs, the 12-sign zodiacs of Earth and heavens, respectively. But, you know, I take a lot of flack from sidereal astrologers who say your signs are wrong. They're not aligned to the constellations. Well, neither is the sidereal zodiac. I mean, in fact, the sidereal zodiac, the most popular sidereal zodiacs, are calibrated by assigning 0 degrees Libra to this star in the constellation Virgo, who I call priestess, just to not confuse signs and constellation, which are not the same thing. That's absolutely true for the tropical zodiac in our day and age, and it's getting more and more diverged. It's also true for the sidereal zodiac, because the astronomers are completely right that the 12 zodiacal constellations, the constellations that skirt the ecliptic, are not all equal in size. Like the Virgo constellation, if you like to say the priestess, is like 47 degrees of arc, not 30. And the Ram is only like 15, 17, okay? So there's a very important reason why we make 12 equal divisions. And I'll just again say this cute thing that creation creates in 12s. Another time I'd like to prove that to you. But we have to spend some time with the compass and the square if we really want to go there. Anyway, so here around the year 304 AD, the tropical zodiac and the sidereal zodiac were the same thing. That wasn't true in the Hellenistic times, and they knew about precession. They knew this would shift when like the tropical zodiac was born. It might actually greatly predate that time. I think that's true, and I'm seeing research that suggests so, that it was something practiced in Kemet in Egypt well before, but we don't have those writings because it was a magical tradition that was transmitted by word to the initiates, you know. Anyway, so 304 BC, we're going to go from here. We're going to go further back in time. I just hope you can see. So there's Spica, there's 47 degrees priestess and 15, 17 degrees Ram. Again, that's because of precession. Let's do this one again. So really importantly, as north and south shift, east-west from the center of the earth are also shifting, okay? This is that complicated illustration I promised earlier. Anna likes to create really simple things. So she was like, dude, I can't put all this on something. I'm almost just going to leave this for you to see, but I guess I won't. It's aligned to the ecliptic. So this is the celestial equator. I always write in blue, the circle of matter, primary motion, the spinning, right? These 12 signs, that's the motion of the year. And I'm showing in the colors here, the tropical zodiac, and then in the purple, as I did in the previous image, the sidereal zodiac. And so here's the North Pole currently pointing to Polaris, but that shifts. Like it was Thuban like 5,000 years ago, and it will shift. And we won't have a North Star for some time until we get to stars in Cepheus, and we go back eventually towards Vega, which was said to be our North Star in the Golden Age 13,000 years ago, and the Golden Age to come in 13,000 years from now. But don't fall prey to that thing. We don't have to wait. All right. So as north and south shift, as the solstice points shift, so do east and west, right? And we're usually tuning into this east point to define the current state of the astrological ages. Like right now, our east point, this is current, is pointing to the end of sidereal Pisces. We're going to look at that astronomically here. So this illustration set that we've created is really helpful for this. So just give your attention to the east point here, okay? This is 304 AD. This is when the sidereal and the tropical were aligned. And we're in the age of the fish. If you're using the constellations, that began well before then, but there's a different way we could approach that. I'll get back to that concept, okay? So here's like 1 AD. We saw this in a different way, like 7 AD with that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. I mean, it's hard to say exactly when this is. Again, 72 years for 1 degree. That's kind of the ancient numerological transmission, which would give 1 degree times, or 72 years per degree times 360 degrees. 72 times 360 is 25,920 years. So we usually say about 26,000. And again, 5 of the Maya long counts, 5125, is about that. Okay. So it was around the time 1 AD, 1 BC, when the east point precessed into the constellation of the fish. And I argue it should be called BP, before Pisces, if this thing is a constellational trip, but it may not be. if it's a numerological thing, and we do feel that there's a potential truth, I certainly feel it is, that the shift from BC to AD was an astronomical device talking about this constellational happening of the east point aligning to the fish, then we could divide that 25,920 years, okay, the full circle, into 12 months, right? The great year of about 26,000 years into 12 months. They're each 2,160 years. That's 25,920 divided by 12, or 72, right? Years per degree times 30 degrees, one sign. All right, so 2160, which, as I stated earlier, is amazingly the diameter of the moon in miles. So I'm going to go back 2,160 years from here, and this is like the birth of the ram. Or I'll go 2160 before that to the birthing of the bull, 4,320 BC. Interestingly, the sun is 432,000 miles in diameter, no, in radius. And so that's 864,000 miles in diameter. And there's 86,400 seconds in a day. Anyway, I see like I kind of made an error before, because I'm doing 30 degrees here and aligning to these like sidereal sign points, right? So like at this time, this is like Aries equals Gemini, Taurus equals Cancer, Gemini equals Leo, right? Like 2 signs off. But just to kind of speak of the mythic thing, people say this was the age of the bull, that 2,160 years later, we processed to the ram, and then the shepherd kings were born, right? And it was like, hey, let my people go. And there's this interesting thing about Moses, right, receiving the commandments, thou shalt not kill, and he and Aaron shortly after, like on the next page, killed 3,000 of their own people. Why? Because they were worshiping a golden bull. So some speak that this is a mythic transmission of the shift from the age of the bull to the age of the ram, right? We see that perhaps in the death of the bull of heaven in the Inanna story, the oldest story that we know of written down from Sumer. Well, Theseus defeating the Minotaur, Mithras stabbing the bull, right? I mean, it's just everywhere. Anyway, so then the ram comes, like we can say 2160 BC if we just play numerologically, and then at the 0 point, the age of the fish began with this one who was born, the good shepherd, the Lamb of God, and becomes the fisher of men. All right, let's fast forward to our current time. And we've like brought our attention from this east point elsewhere. I'm trying to remember if I do that here. Yeah. So we've been looking at this 0 Capricorn or south point aligned to the galactic cross in the mouth of the Ouroboros. I write 2012, but really like kind of 75 to 2025, we're still in the range. Now, it's John Major Jenkins' contention that the Maya created their long count calendar, which does recycle December 21st, 2012, because of this astronomical happening, and offers many prophecies from many lands around this. My first teacher, Daniel Jamario at Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, was super tuned into this as basically the rebirthing, you know, like the most important happening, these Uranus, Pluto things, these Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto things, like the great many years. But I mean, 26,000 years is a much wider blanket. And of course, the south point won't align to galactic center like this for 26,000 years. Or I should say galactic cross, because we do need another 3 degrees of precession for the south point to be at that radio telescope measured galactic center. So 3 degrees of precession, 72 years per degree times 3 is 216. All right, so we can do 2012 plus 216, like 2228, somewhere in that zone, okay? So maybe the revelation and all that's then, but why should we wait? So I'll bring our attention down here. All right. That all being said, I'm just realizing I made a slip in this build of a gazillion pictures and animations. I hope you've been enjoying that. Because I want to talk about this East Point and the so-called dawning of the Age of Aquarius, right? So here we are, 2012, like clearly still aligned to the head of a fish. And from what I can see, the East Point won't precess to a star of the water bearer constellation. And I say water bearer instead of Aquarius, again, to differentiate constellations and signs, which are different things, whether you're talking tropical, as I am, or sidereal. But the East Point precesses through this motion. As north changes, so does east of the center of Earth. Precesses to a star of the water bearer in like 2950 or like 3000. Okay, so maybe that's the dawning of the Age of Aquarius. It certainly seems it's happening now. I mean, I'm transmitting this through space waves, you know, like blasted to satellites and coming through your computer screens and all that, you know. So maybe it's not a constellational trip. I mean, I'm really interested, as I said before, of like learning the alignments of the tropical zodiac and the sidereal zodiac. Like there's these two 12-toothed gears that are like, and about every 2160 years, they will mesh, right, equally. And, you know, there's some weird math going on, like I showed before, 304 AD, which was like the alignment of Aries to Aries and Taurus to Taurus. This is Aries to Pisces, right? So this is one full shift. 304 plus 2160 is 2464, right? So not quite there, but 2160 is this like numerologically powerful number. And some say the rate changes. It's not NASA's rate, whatever. Anyway, about 2444, which if nothing else is a beautiful number. We see this like alignment of tropical Aries to sidereal Pisces, of tropical Taurus to sidereal Aries, Gemini to Taurus, Cancer to Gemini. I will suggest that you and I and all beings who are opening their eyes are literally mechanisms and offerings to the archetypal ascension, right? That like we literally are here to help like spirit grow. But there's a great astronomical mechanism, many of them, and one of them is this, to help the archetypes shift, okay? So what I will argue is that Aries Pisces at this time is a very different energetic than Aries Aries at like 304 AD. In about 2160 years from this will be Aries Aquarius. And 2160 years after that, Aries Capricorn, right? I'm talking tropical sidereal. So this seems to be, for me, one of the mechanisms, the way that the 12-tooth gear of the heavenly zodiac, the sidereal zodiac, and the 12-tooth gear of the earthly zodiac, the tropical zodiac, mesh. So I'd be looking for 2444 for this great shift. And yet, got ahead of myself before, this is when the South Point is on the galactic cross. These purple signs are defined, as we saw, from Spica or Spica, which is a very powerful star. But what if we created a sidereal zodiac based from the galactic cross? And if we did, we would find that it's in our day and age that alignment is happening. Like, what if these purple slices started right there at the crosses? Why Spica? And there's a lot of cool, good reasons for that. But what if we made a 12-sign zodiac starting here? If we did, the meshing would be happening now and has been happening. And we can see that at the South Point, the 0 Capricorn point aligned to that galactic cross near galactic center. And we can look down here to those Templar Knights that I believe Chartres Cathedral is pointing us to. And that this has something to do with this ascension trip. So when astrologers teach precession, and I'm one of them, we often will speak to this quote from the Bible when Jesus tells the disciples the night before the crucifixion, when he is asked where the Passover supper will be, he tells them to enter the city and to find the man bearing the pitcher of water and follow him into the house in which he dwells. And then go upstairs. You know, I mean, it sounds like a transmission of the dawning of the age of Aquarius, the age of the water bearer. But he doesn't say anything about when. But if you flip the page, I'm convinced he does. And this is the new piece that I've added. I've been after this for a few years, and it's my joy to share it once again here. We'll see what you think. On trial, the day of the crucifixion, Jesus is asked, to provoke blasphemy, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" "I am," said Jesus, "and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." Sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One. Most translations say the right hand of power, but that word has also been associated, as I will suggest the Mighty One should be, with the constellation of Orion, or Osiris, or as he's called in Bengali, Kalparish, which means time man, right? In the center of the sacred hoop, on that rainbow, on the clouds of heaven, which are the Milky Way. So it is in our day and age when, and this happens every year, that the sun will find its way to the center of the sacred hoop, but in our day and age, it is the June solstice sun, okay? The northern hemisphere, glory of the king, the height of the light. The north point leans, right, to that hand of the high man, the hand of the time man, in the center of the womb of creation. And the Lakota tell us that our souls come from there. The sacred hoop, which you can see their asterism drawn here, stellarium, thank you. Stellarium, amazing software. Here's another Nakota constellation. It's the fire pit. Because not only is this sacred hoop in the womb from which we come, there's something in the Big Dipper that works this way too, the blue midwife. But it's said to be the place where we will go at the end of our days to be purified as a sweat lodge and a nipi in the sky. And this is the fire pit, okay, where the fire comes and the stones are brought into the sweat lodge. Well, there's some interesting stones in the sweat lodge, the moon and the sun, during this 2020 June solstice eclipse, right? So, wrapping up, in our day and age, and this is very rare, the December solstice sun is aligned to the galactic cross, the sun on the cross, in the mouth of the Ouroboros, near the galactic center, okay? And the June solstice sun, the glory of the king, the height of the light, is now aligned to the hand of the high man in the sacred hoop. So, is this special? I think so. This is the clouds of heaven, okay, the Milky Way, the hand of the Mighty One, and the Son of Man. The son of woman, the son of human, the son of earthling, the son of God, goddess, universe, whatever, from our point of view here. Now, it's not the only time this has happened. So here's this chart, which I've now titled High Man Eclipse. June 21st, 2020. How do we get ready for this? Be the best you can be. That's it. Well, and explore the mysteries. 2039, the Metonic cycle, 19 years from now, another new moon, the first degree of Cancer, and close enough to that node to be an eclipse. Excuse me, another annular solar eclipse, ring of fire, actually. And I can tell because they're close enough to the node to be a total eclipse, but also close to Lilith, which means the moon is very small. So it's an annular. Okay, hopefully if you watched since the beginning, that's landing too. Why don't I put the high man in the circle here? Because as we saw earlier, by 2039, the south point has slipped. It has precessed from the galactic cross, okay? We saw that on the other side of the sky with the 0 Capricorn point, the south points slipping from the galactic center side of the galactic cross. But that, of course, means the north point, the 0 Cancer point, will also slip from the cross on the other side, All right. 2058, another Metonic cycle, another 19-year cycle, and another eclipse, this time a partial eclipse, the last minutes of Gemini and a Gemini node, but far enough now at 14, almost 15 degrees to be a partial eclipse. Still a solstice eclipse, but not on the hand of the high man. The points have slipped even further than from the galactic crosses at that time. They're there this year. They were there 2 Metonic cycles, or 38 years ago in 1982. It's fascinating to me that in this book I was showing earlier, like a lot of the Star of Bethlehem, like astronomical transmissions were like happening around this time. And very importantly, this was the last Saturn-Pluto conjunction in the year of 1982. In 1981, the first actual air sign conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, Jupiter and Pluto in 1981, Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto all hanging out together in the sign of Libra in 1981, just as they are hanging out together in the sign of Capricorn, and more tightly so this year. And we talked about Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions as a potential Star of Bethlehem that happened in 7 BC and is happening on December 21st, 2020, when the December solstice of the South Point sun is aligned to the galactic cross. But the June solstice sun aligns in 2020 to the other galactic cross in the sacred hoop, the hand of the mighty one on the clouds of heaven. And that happened in 1982. It was the first of these 5, what I call Metonic string of solstice eclipses, 1982, 2001, 2020, here's 2001, 2020, 2039, 2058. Only 3 of them, however, aligned to the hand of the high man. So of the 5, from 1982 to 2058, 2020 is the center point. But of the 3 that are aligned to the hand of the high man, 1982, 2001, and 2020, 2001 is the center point, and it is the only total solar eclipse of the 5. I mean, interestingly, it's much further from the node than the eclipse of 2020, isn't it? And yet, Moon is close to opposite Lilith, you see. So that means Moon is close to Earth, big, and big enough to eclipse the sun, which at this time of the year, as we discussed before, is actually a little bit small. All right. Well, here's another god or goddess stretching that club up towards the heavens. And that was the year, of course, 2001, when a picture like this could have been taken, stretching towards the 2 pillars of the temple, Joachim and Boaz, if you speak that language. The earthly pillar and the celestial pillar. And that was a year that changed our lives, all of our lives. That was a year that is still changing our lives. And I think part of the revelation that has to go down, as I said before, Gemini breath is a Scorpio, and true to that conspiratorial side that some associate with the 2 signs with, there's something fishy in 2001. There's something off with that story that we've been told, isn't there? And if we want to help rebirth this light, I think if it's that way or any other way, we need to not fear our gaze into the shadows. This is one of the great gifts of the Gemini twins. Polydeuces released his immortality so he could be with his brother in death just as they were in life. Father Zeus says, well, it's going to be like this. Castor will be in the underworld and you'll be in the heavens. Actually, no, every year you'll change places. And in the day when you change places, you can hang out. So I ask you this, young Polydeuces, my son, would you choose to forgo your immortality simply to see your brother one day every year, knowing that every other year you have to spend time enjoying the torments of Hades, which I assure you, you will not enjoy? Polydeuces, the immortal Gemini boy, shocked his father and agreed to these terms. So his father, as only his father could, change those terms and instead place these twins side by side, these nights side by side in our night sky as the constellation we call Gemini. But just as with all of the ecliptic constellations, Gemini spends half the time above and half the time below. Together, the twins are exploring the light and the darkness, the hot and the cold. So it's not completely shedding the idea of duality to find unity. It is perhaps unifying the two to remember we are the one. And I think that is the statement of this rebirthing of the sun. I think this year of 2020 is offering a significant course correct. I think it will be tricky. The Jupiter-Pluto, Saturn-Pluto, the Jupiter-Saturn epoch shift, these are huge themes. We will see things in the outer world that are going to be heavy. But the more centered we can be, the more we can be that trunk of the tree for others around us, and to hold it together for our world, which is not sinking, my friends. It is rising. You are the one you have been waiting for. And we are looking forward to seeing even more of your light in this year of 2020. You can find more of my light at GeminiBrett.com. If you scroll down a little bit on the homepage, you'll find a place to sign my mailing list. This long video will be sent to everyone there. You will also find a limited opportunity to have a shamanic shorty, a 33-minute reading. For $33 with me, we will tune into the sun, moon, and earth, spirit, soul, and matter in the way that I hear them singing in the song of your soul. So I hope you'll come over and support my work. That would be a great way to do so. Just remembering I have not yet put a donate button on this site, but I will. But in strange Gemini fashion, I actually have 2 websites right now. So if you just want to give a little something back for what you've received here, I sure would appreciate it. You can find a PayPal donate link at morethan.astrology@gmail.com. Or you could contact me and set something up. But what I'd prefer to do is a session. So here's a $33 special. You can go to work with me and see some of the other offerings, okay? There's a free teachings page where you'll find all sorts of things like the DC mysteries. There's a courses page where you can receive 12 free sacred astronomy lessons, fun little videos. Or this April, the end of April of this amazing year 2020, when things are really starting to heat up, come cool off, in the most amazingly beautiful Zion National Park in Utah with me and with the Organization for Professional Astrology, the OPA retreat. You can find more at opaastrology.org. It's down there at the bottom of the page. I will be leading a 3-day and, very importantly, 3-night sacred astronomy for astrologers training. It works towards certification for OPA if you're interested in that, but most importantly, it will help you develop your connection to the marriage of heaven and earth. And I hope this video today has. So I'm seeing that I forgot to write GeminiBrett.com on that one, but I think that's cool. What is this second coming? What is this revelation? What is this apocalypse? What is this revealing? I think we saw a very powerful statement of it in 2001. And I'm not saying that this means we're only going to see more of the same, though I won't shy away from the idea that this will, there will be outer world significant catalysts and stimulants that remind us to do the work here and to share our work with everyone. And to remember, friends, we are the sun. See you in space. And I'll see you in space. Friends, love and planets to you.